Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today, whatever time it is. Some of you are very late at night. Some of you are very early in the morning. Just a couple of things before we begin. I want to make sure that you know that we've disabled the chat. And if you have questions, there at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A, and that's where you enter your questions. And I think that's about it. So we're going to begin with an opening prayer with Sherry Mitchell.
Thank you, Letitia. Kwe and Agwanude from Kwabnakieg from Banawebske.
That's about it.
Sorry about that. There's some feedback there. I'm just going to offer a quick opening prayer so that we can come together in a good way with good hearts, good minds, so that the work that we're doing here with one another can help to guide this process towards greater infusion of that mother love into the work that we're all doing. So just a brief prayer. Kachiwaliwan, Wajukumtiltina, Nukamis, Okamis, Nigwaskikdemik. Kachiwaliwan, Kachiniwesk, Akjamundo, Wajukum, Tiltina. Wajukumino, Wabayad Muslims, Wabayad, Okamis. Kachiwaliwan, Kamachkasomo. Thank you so much, and I hope that we have a beautiful day together. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the wisdom of all of these wise, wise women. So, Kachiwaliwan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry. So we are so excited to have you all with us. We heard today that there were over 700 people who were registered, and we are thrilled. We have a wonderful lineup for you. The first person who will be speaking is Genevieve Vaughn, whose theory of the gift economy has inspired many. And we hope that you'll be able to grasp the nuances of what makes the maternal gift economy different from all other gift economies. That word seems to have tumbled out and is growing in interest. Genevieve Vaughn is an independent researcher who lives part-time in Italy and part-time in Texas. She created a multicultural all-woman activist foundation for a compassionate society and is the founding mother of the Temple of Sekhmet in the Nevada desert. She co-created the network of the International Feminists for a Gift Economy. Her books are Forgiving, A Feminist Criticism of Exchange, Homo Dono, and The Gift in the Heart of Language. She has edited El Dono, The Gift in Italian and English, Women in the Gift Economy, and The Maternal Roots of the Gift Economy, which is the Canadian Women's Studies journal dedicated to the maternal gift economy that just was released this year. So without further ado, Genevieve.
Thank you so much, Letitia. Thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you to Sherry for the prayer. And thank you to all you 700 people that are out there listening. So I think we need a paradigm shift, a very deep one and a very long-lasting one, deeper than the ones that we've thought of before. And I believe that what is holding that alternative paradigm is the role of mothering that has existed from time immemorial and is so necessary for living at all. And so I think that the other part of that is that children who accept and understand when they're very small this model of mothering, which is a model of giving unilaterally because the children can't give back an equivalent of what they've received. So there is this free economy at the beginning of life. And it's in that economy that we learn all of our basics as human beings. We learn how to perceive and what to make of what we've perceived and how to receive. And also we imitate our mothers in how we give. And we have a life that is circles around this logic of giving and receiving. And that is a logic that has been perverted by the logic of exchange, where you only give in order to get back. Exchange is ego-oriented because you give in order to get. And giving and receiving is other-oriented because you give to satisfy a need, and somebody is giving to you in an other-oriented way. And then you can imitate that person also, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's an exchange. Anyway, I began thinking about all this in the 1960s, because, and I'll tell you just a little bit of how I came to it. I was born in Texas and I moved to Italy. I married an Italian philosophy professor and moved to Italy. And he was invited to be part of a journal that then never happened, but the journal was going to be based on applying Marx's analysis of the commodity and money to language. And I had this huge aha moment at the time and just was so overwhelmed with this whole idea of being able to apply economics to language. And then as time went on, my husband at the time wrote some books about exchange or the market as compared to language. And when I had my little girls, I realized that they were learning language, but they didn't know how to do the market. They didn't know how to exchange things for money. It was completely beyond them. And so I realized that language could not come from the market. It had to come from something else. And I thought at the time that it probably came from the nurturing that was going on, that I was doing myself with them. And I realized that native peoples that didn't have markets that we have in our Euro-American ways, they could certainly talk even if they weren't having markets. So it couldn't be that. And maybe it was from the gift economies and the respect of the mothering that they actually had. And so that's how I actually came to this. And after that, I began to write about gifting and mothering. And then I came back to Texas, and since nobody understood what the gift economy that I had in mind was, I started a foundation in order to try to practice it. And so time has gone on for a long time since then, and it's now 50 years after the beginning of my falling in love with the gift economy, basically. And I think that we have to do this paradigm shift that I'm thinking of. We have to go back to the essence of mothering, to the very structures of giving and receiving, and leave exchange aside. And I think that the gift and the way it's structured as A gives to B is the maybe very simplest human interaction that there is. You don't need a return gift or a return, an exchange, a quid pro quo, in order to make it meaningful. In fact, it's meaningful when you give to satisfy the needs of the other person. And that is what makes meaning happen in our lives. And it also makes it happen in language. So I think what has happened is that we have created all of this an enormous amount of philosophy and academia to explain things that we have to explain because we've left out mothering and this unilateral giving and receiving from the explanation of the world. And instead, I think we can take that small piece of thinking and doing and elaborate it in all kinds of different ways. I was listening to the radio the other day and I heard a piece by Mozart, which was 12 variations on a theme of which was like, the theme was something, sounded a little bit like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It was very simple. And he had all of these different variations. And I think that's just what life does with this theme of mothering. And it goes throughout tons of variations. And also the variation of exchange, which is a doubling of giving, a giving in order to receive, a quid pro quo, that's still a double gift, a giving that gives back, and and it's constrained. It has to be that way. Otherwise, the gift is not given. And that is another, let's say, theme that is, or variation that's placed over the gift basis, and it disguises it and contradicts it. So we don't really even see that the gifting is happening. And when we don't see it, we don't know it's happening, and we don't value it. And that is part of the reason, I believe, that mothers and mothering have been so ignored throughout history, and so second-class citizens, and had not been able to be the leadership of society, very different from the matriarchal societies that Heidi and Sherry will be talking about. It's just this commodification and exchange and the capitalist market that cancels the mothering way, but at the same time, it takes from that mothering way. The givers give to the exchange society. And we don't see the gifts. We don't call it gifts. We call it profit. We call it the just reward of people who are actually doing plundering. And if we were to be able to respect gift giving, to understand it as a basic paradigm and a basic logic, then we could possibly stand back from this plunder, from this exchange capitalist way, and understand a way to be in solidarity with everybody, because everybody is born from a mother. Everybody has that at their beginning of their lives. So it's a way what we need to do is to liberate the child who has had the model of the mother and has absorbed that model. And it is throughout language. And I'm saying, have been finding it in language all of this time, as well as words as verbal gifts, and syntax as gifts to gifts, verbal gifts to other verbal gifts. And it's all a kind of uh, verbal gift economy is what language is. And even when we think in terms with language, we're doing this verbal gift giving internally. And that moves us towards a kind of a conscience and a kind of consciousness that works towards community through communication. And you know, community is community. Muni means gifts in Latin, so it is a group of people who are giving gifts together, and the same with communication. So those are just like signals of how we need to behave in order to stop this total destruction of the environment and of the human race that we are doing now. We need a basically very deep, different kind of approach to life. And we do have it because it is it is in the lives of everyone. We've learned to explain things in other ways, but we need to bring back this maternal logic. Unfortunately, we've interpreted it as morality, or you thought of it as a religious ways of doing things. But instead, it's actually part of the simple, basic practice of every mother and child. And we had philosophers like Derrida, who said that it was impossible to do gift giving. Instead, he didn't even look at the mothers who are doing this every day without any recognition. And in fact, he said that you couldn't really give a unilateral gift because you'd have an ego reward from doing it. But mothers don't get that. Nobody even pays any attention. So they are hardly able to do it, to have the big ego from it. Now, I think that we need to realize also that the market and capitalism, as I was saying, take from the gift economy. And they do that it does it through surplus labor, which is that part of the work that is not paid for by the capitalist. It's also that this gift comes from the domestic labor in the home, women in the home who are caring for everybody and giving their gift labor. And then the products of that gift labor are the people that go to the market as workers. And so that gift is channeled through their children and their husbands and so forth, and themselves, even when they are working in the market themselves. And then the biggest gift giver is Mother Earth, and that all of the gifts that come from Mother Earth are also taken and made into profit and into capital that is then recycled and replayed as a way of exploiting and taking more gifts. And so we have this strange situation of this market that is like a parasite on the gift economy, on the mothering economy. And that is really a huge problem. And it's also the market is also a parasite on the earth. And this is one of the main reasons why we are in such a terrible shape as we are. I don't mean to say by this that everybody that works in the exchange economy and the market is a bad person. That there are lots of gifts that can be given and are being given all the time by people who are working in the exchange economy. But we have still a gift economy sort of unrecognized that we practice towards each other. Like I say, I think it's done in language, but we're also in all our human relations. We do a lot of gifting without being recognized as doing that. And we don't recognize it ourselves. We just think it's just the way we are. But I think if we can begin to recognize this giving and receiving way, the logic of the gift, then we can begin to change and recognize also that the various projects that people are doing to try to change things for the better, the gift economy projects they're trying to create, all of the social change projects are trying to satisfy a need. And that need is the satisfaction of that need is the gift that we're trying to give. And many different ways of giving, even sometimes the ones that are like with alternative currencies, they're still using money, but they're trying to solve a problem. And so that is a gift they're trying to give. So I do think, though, that money is one of the biggest problems that there are, because it abstracts our thinking away from the gift giving and receiving way. And there's a lot has been written now about the work of this man named Son Rethel, who discussed the exchange abstraction in Marx's analysis of the exchange of commodities, and how that exchange abstraction happens through the exchange itself, and how bad it is really for us. And I've just thought, though, just recently, that we don't have a gift abstraction. And so if people are all thinking according to the exchange abstraction, they're not recognizing gifting. And so we need to abstract it a little bit in order to just say that it is at the same level of any of the other activities that are going on in life. And we need to give gift giving a meta level of its own, so that we can discuss it on its own, not just as part of exceptional behavior by some good people. So that is more or less what I have to say. I don't know if I've gotten up to 20 minutes yet, but maybe I would like to say a couple more things if I.
Yes, Jen, please, you have a few more minutes. You can go until 10:30, about 7 minutes left.
Okay. So like I was saying, you can interpret so many things in terms of giving and receiving. And I think that we can base an epistemology on that, on our relation to our surroundings. There is an idea by this psychologist J.J. Gibson, who has this theory of visual perception, in which he identified affordances. He says the world is just full of affordances, and those are those things that the creature who is perceiving them realizes that they can be able to do things with that thing. So he says, for example, that the affordance of a chair is to sit in. Now, I see that as the gift that the chair can give us. And I think that we can look at the world around us as full of gifts that we can then receive. And that is, we base our perception on receiving and giving gifts. And that is, it looks very obvious to me, but it certainly isn't what philosophers and epistemologists have thought in the past. It is instead what Native peoples have often thought. So I think there is a way of arriving at a philosophy based on mothering and giving and receiving that that can bring us to a philosophy that mothers and women and indigenous people can share, and that also men can share, but they haven't so far because they haven't taken seriously the giving and receiving that mothers have to take seriously because they're doing it with little kids who and they have to do it in order to make them survive. And in fact, it's that survival side of things that is the serious side of how we relate to each other. And on that basis, we maintain meaningful relationships throughout our lives. And in fact, the gift economy is an economy of relationships, of relationality, whereas the exchange economy separates people from each other, because if you're only giving in order to get back something, you're looking out for yourself for number one and not for the other person. And it seems very simple, I know, but in our society, our values are just going way out the window, and with the neoliberalism takes us into that egocentric way of acting, and it's killing the world. It's killing Mother Earth and each other. So I mean, you see it even with the COVID, where people don't wear the mask because they're not worried about the other person, and so I think it's obvious for me everywhere I look. I see the necessity of recognizing gifts and the receiving and giving gifts. So there are, let's say, part of the gift paradigm is that it shows up also in other aspects of life, like telling the truth is satisfying the need, the cognitive need of the other person to know what they need to do. Whereas telling a lie is an ego-oriented, sort of an exchange-based way of thinking and doing things. Justice is based on an equivalence between the crime and the punishment. And that's an exchange-based logic. Although now there is also restorative justice that is much more based on a gift-giving way. Then we have value. What is value? We talk about exchange value and use value, but there's another value, which is gift value, which gives value to the other. When you're taking care of a child, when you're satisfying somebody's need, that implies that that other person is valuable, that they have some intrinsic value for you. And so that is a way that the other person receives dose of self-esteem from the gift that's given. On the other hand, exchange doesn't do that. It divides the value only of the object into exchange value and use value. Well, it's not, it's use value is just something that you use, but it doesn't imply the value of the user. Whereas giving a gift or satisfying a need of a child does imply the value of the other. And so that part of the discussion of value has been left out by the economists, and putting back mothering and gifting into these discussions, into the view of the world, can really, really change things. And that's, I think we have to do that in order to survive. And I think we can. And I don't know if, it seems too simple to you all, but the simple things are the most profound. And so I invite you, and I pray you to think of that deeply and try to use the glasses of the exchange, of the gift paradigm, to counter the view of the exchange paradigm. And so that is basically what I have to say for now. And so I thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you, Jen. Well, I think that you've primed us to wear our gift lenses as we're viewing and listening to these talks. I really appreciate everything that you have to say. And yes, relationality and getting back to the basics, that's very important. I want to remind everyone that we'll have question and answers at the end of all the speakers. So while you're listening, pop your question into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And we have people who are monitoring that and will make sure that your questions are addressed. If we can't get to them this session, then we have the salons that are coming up, and we'll be able to go deeper into those questions during the salons. Our next speaker is actually going to take us back to the root of what Genevieve had talked about, of getting back to the basics of the mother and the child relationship. We're very thrilled to have Darcia Narvaez, a professor emerita of psychology at the University of Notre Dame, fellow of the American Psychological Association and the American Educational Research Association. She employs a lifespan interdisciplinary approach to studying evolved morality, child development, and flourishing. She blogs for Psychology Today, entitled Moral Landscapes, and hosts the webpage evolvednest.org. Wave, Darcia. Hi. We're so glad. Darcia has recorded her talk. So, and she'll be here throughout the entire program. So you can ask her questions at the end of all the speakers. Thanks for being with us, Darcia. Diane, could you play Darcia's program?
Hello, my name is Darcia Narvaez, and I'm presenting a talk on mothering and nested care, the core of societal health and human potential. So my focus in my research is the baseline of our original partnership societies, small band hunter-gatherers, and we have converging evidence on what they were like. In these societies, they provide a cycle of what I call cooperative companionship. Number one, they provide companionship caregiving to babies and children in those early years when our brains are being shaped by experience. And this leads to number two, thriving individuals, psychosocial neurobiologies that work well, leading to number three, thriving adults who have well-being and wisdom, and to number four, a societal thriving, where attention to basic needs is common. And within this cycle, there's also the attention to the natural world as part of the community. So relational connection to the bio-community, to the local landscape, placefulness, and leading to a kind of indigenous wisdom. Now, what does that early companionship look like? Number one, well, we study the evolved nest in my lab. We do empirical data collection as well as write theoretical papers, and we apply as well. And we call it the evolved nest, the system of care that we evolved as a species to provide our young. And this includes various features that are really initially a unilateral gift from mothers, primarily, and then other mothers as well, and the community as a whole, the village. And so you can see number one there, soothing perinatal experiences. So no separation of mom and baby, no painful procedures, on request breastfeeding for several years, which grows the brain and body to optimal condition, grows the skull and jaw, and so forth. And positive moving touch, number 3 there. So, and no negative touch, no corporal punishment, no coercion. Positive welcoming climate, so the baby feels and child feels like they belong and that they have something to offer. Self-directed social play, allo mothers, that means other mothers, other parents, others, the villagers, the band members who provide this kind of nested care, which includes number 7, responsive relationships. So attuned to the individuality, the kind of having a mutual responsiveness to emotions and communications. Babies are ready for this from birth. 8, nature connection, so immersion into the natural world, the local landscape. So you build that sense of connection with the trees, the animals and plants and rivers and mountains in that vicinity, especially. And healing practices, because humans make lots of mistakes and we take up resentments unless we have these routine healing practices to let those things go and renew our relationships. So what does number 2 look like? Thriving adults. After you've had this nest, this is what it looks like around the world in these kinds of societies, an ability to be emotionally present with a quiet mind, to be innerly happy, to display childlike glee, full of energy and vitality, fully alive and aware of the sacredness of life, unconditionally listening to others, having empathy and a sense of connection with others, ecological attachment, that relational respect for nature, the rest of nature, authentic helpfulness towards others, and the ability to use one's gifts to mentor others, to pay it forward, and then love, a demonstration of compassion and forgiveness. Then what do these societies look like? Well, they're egalitarian, they're connected to the sacred web of life, they maintain harmony and balance, they have high autonomy, they can do as they will as individuals, but also high communalism, so their empathy is very much tailored to the well-being of others. And they spend most of their time here in positive social engagement, sharing music and dance and song and laughter. Again, no coercion. And their higher consciousness, their ability to abstract, is attentive to their relationships. So the web of life, emotionally engaged in the ways of thinking, and very little time is spent in self-protectionism, which I'll explain soon. So these original partnership societies then are full of social and ecological wealth. And in these societies, polysemy is dominant and univocity is rarely used. So let me explain that. Polysemy is this dynamic flow state that is dominant, where you're able to take multiple perspectives, perceive entities from multiple viewpoints, and it shifts depending on what's happening in your mood. This transpersonalism, the ability to merge with multiple others, human and other than human. The de-differentiation then is what is happening here. It's part of this flow state, finding oneness with others rather than difference and separation, and being fully in the now, in the present moment, heavy with connections to others, feeling like, there's so much going on, oh my goodness, and you feel the dynamic, fluctuating universe of the manifest and the unmanifest. Univocity, on the other hand, is a problem-solving mode, which is used when necessary, this linear logical thinking of what to do in a particular situation. It's really used, though, in these societies. So as we can see from looking at ethology, all animals have a nest. We do too. I mentioned what those characteristics are. And when you provide the nest, you're going to end up with a species typical outcome because you have a species typical developmental system. And that species typical outcome is a smart, effective creature. What happens, though, when you don't provide that species typical developmental system, that's something atypical? Well, you're going to end up with a creature that's outside the evolved range of intelligence and effectiveness, a species atypical outcome. So what's happened over course of history is that the shift to patriarchy and hierarchy has undermined human development. It's pulled us out of all those good things I just went through. So what happens then when you don't have this nestedness, that number one start of the cycle? Well, you're going to have ill health. You'll have mental problems of anxiety, particularly depression also, then anger and reactivity because all your systems don't work very well, physical ill health, social ill health. It'll be hard to get along with others because you're dysregulated and you didn't develop all those layers of social skills that are pre-verbal. And your moral health will also be more self-oriented. So you feel generally disconnected from yourself. You don't know really who you are. You have a false self. You feel disconnected from others, from the community and the world. And physiologically, this is occurring in part because all these systems have been misdeveloped. The stress response isn't working well. Your immune system, endocrine system, like the oxytocin system, you don't know, you don't feel good when you cuddle, for example. This is what we've seen in orphans, for example, that were in hospitals for so long or in orphanages. They have a hard time appreciating being physically close to others. Neurotransmitters also are going to be affected. You'll have fewer of them. They don't function as well, so you're not going to be as smart. Your emotion systems will be misdeveloped, and I'll talk more about that. And the corpus callosum, what unites the two halves of the brain, is not going to be as thick, and so you will flip in and out of states. So early life stress is going to undermine the development of all these things. And without the nest, I call that undercare. Psychologically, then, what you grow up with then is a distrust of your own body, an impaired sense of who you are, never feeling secure, a deep sense of disconnection and insecurity. You live against others then instead of with them because you didn't develop the things that help you do the latter. And you're kind of socially disagreeable, kind of oppositional or withdrawal, and not all fluidly interconnected with others as we see in our ancestral original societies. And so you have a basic distrust of others too, which will breed then anxiety, social anxiety, cynicism, as well as demonization of the others. Because what happens when you have that early disruption, a basic fault, a primal wound, is you've got to do something with that anger that you're going to have and the anxiety. And it's easiest to not pay attention to it and heal it because it's all in this pre-verbal implicit cognition. And instead, you're going to push it out and target some other group or some other. And so it's easy to demonize, green people, for example. Oh, and your family may have drawn you to pay attention to who's green. And then every time you see someone green or think about it, you get in that panic mode and you can just push all your anger and blame over there instead of blaming your parents for not giving you what you needed because you're a little baby and you didn't know, or yourself because it's just too hard, too painful to look at yourself or to your parents. So you push it out. And so what's happening in the brain function, this is Paul MacLean's Triune Brain Theory, very helpful for understanding the brain states we can get into. We're born with these survival systems, so basic emotion systems of anger, fear, panic, seeking, lust, intertwined with a stress response system, fight, flight, freeze, faint. And here we're born with those to keep us alive, right? The babies cry when the caregiver is not around, the mother's not around, and that brings the caregiver. That's why it's so annoying to hear a baby cry because it's intended to get help quickly. And what happens after birth, though, is the mammalian systems are grown from experience. So you're ready to grow these, but then they're not being grown, or they hopefully are being grown. And so that's by the way you're treated. So you're going to be if you're lovingly cared for with empathy and responsiveness and all the nest components, you'll grow your emotion systems of care and also the playfulness that's part of our mammalian heritage. And also your executive functions will grow after birth. So these are capacities to control yourself, to think beyond the present moment, to imagine alternatives, and so on. So when things go well, the executive functions learn to control the survival systems. So if a shadow came across the room and you think, oh my God, it's a monster, you thought for a moment, right? And then you realize, no, it's not a monster. These executive systems would calm you down after the panic of, oh my God, it's a monster, right? So that's a well-functioning brain. And so you spend most of your time over here. You're not, yeah. So you're spending most of your time here in what I call heart-centered imagination, where you're enhancing your relationships, your social well-being, and the well-being of others. And that's just an enjoyable place to be. Now, when things don't go right in early life, your brain is going to be more reactive in this direction. You'll have early toxic stress, meaning you were left to cry alone, sleep training, cry it out variety, very harmful in this way, or you're left alone a lot. And so you have, as a baby, you enhance these survival systems, and we call that toxic stress, and it's going to lead then to those overpowering the rest of your brain. Essentially, you see red. And these other systems, the mammalian systems, don't grow very well then. They're impaired because all the attention is to surviving over here. And when you get stressed, which is going to happen a lot because you're dysregulated, you'll see stress. Oh, they're out to get me. They're out to get me, right? And when that kicks in, your blood flow shifts away from your higher order thinking, away from your heart openness, and towards mobilizing you for fight, flight, freeze, faint. And so it floods the brain, shifts the blood flow away from your ability to control yourself. And so you won't think well, you won't feel well, and not getting along well with others, right? Except through dominance relationships. And what's also underdeveloped then in these early years, which is normally developed in good nested care, the right hemisphere, and it's the seat of all these things that are really important for getting along with others, for having a sense of being in a living world, for having a sense of responsiveness to the natural world and to others. So it's all sorts of self-regulation, emotional intelligence, sense of being present, of energy among everyone. All these things are going to be underdeveloped in a person who's unnested. And what's going to happen then is univocity becomes the primary way of being or thinking, is the problem-solving mode. In hierarchical societies, there's a lot of problems to solve. You've got to keep the people lower down, the non-elites, working so that the elites keep getting all the assets. And they're the ones who have the privileges, and you have to convince those lower people or coerce them into working hard so the system keeps going. So the hierarchy needs coercion, and the hierarchy is going to then be reliant on this linear logical thinking, on differentiating things from one thing from another, and this moves into a hierarchical order, hierarchically arranged societies of separate bits. And what happens is, because the focus is in a hierarchical society, for example, a mono-agricultural society, you have to predict when the crops are going to be ready or when you should plant. And so you're always thinking about the past and the future, and you're worried. And when you think about past and future, you're going to be oriented to anxiety and future death, right? So death terror, instead of being on the present moment as polysemy provides. So it's a left brain orientation because the right brain is underdeveloped. The social brain is underdeveloped. You end up with this little thinking conscious brain, left brain, that is very much about static categorization and order. And we think that's the normal way to be. And we highlight reasoning of that kind to be, this is the best way a human can be, and so on. So Western history has reshaped the human mind towards self-protectionism, suppression of polysemy, and emphasis on univocity, increased disconnection, which leads also to dishonoring of nature because you don't perceive it. It's like it's all dead, isn't it? It's all dumb, isn't it? That's the Western view recently. And dishonoring the cycle of life, coercion is taken to be normal because you got all these dysregulated people and they won't. And so you have to use punishment to get them to do what you want them to do in a hierarchy. And human potential, of course, is not reached. So what we've done is we've shifted all our baselines towards vice. So we have impoverished child raising practices, impaired individuals, impaired adulthood, and impoverished culture. And it leads to all these problems we have. So what happens then, as I mentioned, your self-protectionism kicks in, and in the moment you're going to be oppositional, brace yourself against that other person, or you're going to withdraw like a little mouse because your systems don't work very well and you're oriented then to dominance or submission. And on the right side of the diagram, your intellect, the way you use your thinking and planning skills, is you're going to either want to control others or harm them in some fashion, vicious imagination, or you're just going to detach from emotionally connected or relationally connected thought. And you're going to dream up things that, and not think about the consequences, right? And that's the danger for everyone else. So what we've ended up now with, and this is where we are, is a cycle of competitive detachment with a degraded nest, a poor development, adult ill-being, and a degraded culture where the adults are distracted, overwhelmed, or over-controlling. And this cycle is continuing because we forgot our heritage and we've suppressed motherhood and mothering. And so to return, we can intervene at multiple levels, but the particular one that we study in my lab is the nest of companionship that mothering provides, that traditional societies provide, original societies, and leading to these positive outcomes. And so in some, mothering is the key to healthy individuals. It's also central to healthy societies where basic needs are met. And restoring the nest for everyone, but especially for babies when the brain is being set up and established, because babies are born 18 months early. They look like fetuses until 18 months of age. Everything happens to them in those first 3 years of life is setting their trajectory for life. So we really have to restore the nest for babies and then nestedness to the society, and we'll change human futures. Thanks very much to Mary Tarsha, the Moral Psychology Lab, the University of Notre Dame, and all the scholars whose work we integrate and inspire, who inspire us. And there's a lot of information you can find here at these links, and check out evolvenest.org. Thanks.
Thank you, Darsha. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we?
Well, that was a quick overview. I work at high level, the abstract, big picture stuff, and also at the low level. So I try to, mix it up and try to make it clear. But I see the pattern and try to convey that. So hopefully something came across. But certainly mothering and the gifting that Genevieve has discussed is primary in the core way of being that we have to reestablish, restore. I think it also matters that when we restore that, our ability to pay attention to the natural world as a set of living beings, which I think is really critical to feel gifted from trees and the wind and rivers and plants. You have to realize they're alive, right? They're alive too, but if your right hemisphere isn't working very well, maybe you don't perceive it unless you have some, psychedelic experience or, other healing that can occur as an adult. So thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Darsha. So we will have questions for Darsha, I'm sure, in the question and answer. And Darsha brings us right back to the place where we live in our bodies. What Genevieve Vaughn was trying to share as a broad overview for the gift economy was to be able to bring us back to this primary place so that we can heal and move forward together in time in these primary relationships and in relationship to each other. So thank you, Darsha. Our next speaker is Mary Condren. And Mary is the director of Women's Spirit Ireland and a research fellow at the Center for Gender and Women's Studies in the School of Histories and Humanities at Trinity College, Dublin. Her critical work concerns the role of violence and the discourses of sacrifice in contemporary politics. Her constructive work focuses on recuperating the Indigenous female traditions of old Europe in Ireland. So one other reminder, make sure that you take care of your body while you're here with us. We're going to have an extended length of talking, but I want to remind you, you're at home in your house and you can get up and stand up and stretch. So without further ado, Mary, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation, and especially to Jen, who has encouraged me to speak about my work on sacrifice. And unfortunately, I'm going to talk about the shadow side of Western cultures rather than the positive side that Jen and Darsha have been speaking about or are hoping to make possible. I'm speaking as a feminist theologian and theorist, and what I'm going to try to do today is offer a brief encounter with the phenomenon of sacrifice and what it might have to do with the gift. And basically, if sacrifice is the problem, the maternal gift economy is the solution. Now, the word sacrifice is used all over the world as though it meant the same thing. It doesn't. It means very different things and in very different contexts. And in particular, I want to make it clear that I'm not speaking about sacrifice in Indigenous societies where people do some kind of payback to the earth in gratitude for the abundance. I'm speaking about sacrifice in societies of empire and how it works and how it legitimates the social structures under which we live. From the beginning, however, when these empires began to be created, and I know I'm covering a huge amount of history and timeframes, women protested. When Abraham went to sacrifice his son Isaac, when Sarah heard what he had tried to do, she fell dead. The Irish tradition, in an Irish poem, the Virgin Mary pleaded with God the Father, and she said about Jesus, she said, "Please save the world in some other way, but don't let my son be killed." The story that I'm going to thread through my presentation today is the story written by Aeschylus, the playwright, which was a performative play. It wasn't just a narrative, it was performed, much like the Mass is celebrated today. It was to remind the ancient Greeks as to the terms of their social contract. And Agamemnon, who was the hero, had taken a new lover and gone off and was sitting in Thrace and tried to get back home to Greece, but the wind wouldn't move. And so he decided, well, the best thing to do is I'll sacrifice my daughter, Iphigenia. And which he did. Iphigenia came and she was dutifully sacrificed. And shortly after, his wife, Clytemnestra, arrived on the scene. And she said to Agamemnon, she said, he thought no more of killing than killing a beast. And his flocks were rich, teeming in their fleece, but he sacrificed his own child, our daughter, the agony I labored into love. Away the savage winds of Thrace. From that point on in the Eumenides, the refrain from the chorus is, we must learn to suffer into truth. So why should we relate this to the gift? The foundation, this is one of the foundation narratives of patriarchal civilization, which has widespread implications. Power relies on misrecognition of the forces and the tactics that underlie it. As Michel Foucault argued, he said, power is only tolerable on condition that it masks a substantial part of itself. Its success is proportional to its ability to hide its own mechanisms. We need to go further and argue that power not only makes its own mechanisms, but also suppresses the social substrate on which it depends. And that substrate is the maternal gift economy. Now, the word sacrifice is one of those arenas where misrecognition runs riot. There's no agreed definition. I've been working on this for many years. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on sacrifice and I've yet to find a definition, but I can reduce it to something very simple. Sacrifice creates the sacred needs ongoing sacrifice. In other words, there's a splitting at the heart of contemporary sacrificial discourse and rituals. and priests, politicians, human bombers, women, and self-sacrificing women all use the word as though it has the same meaning, and it doesn't. In societies of empire, sacrifice is a weasel word, and there are two main types. There are legitimate and illegitimate. Legitimate sacrifice plays a major role in the construction of the imagined nation, whether that be of an empire or an anti-colonial struggle. Illegitimate sacrifice takes the form of so-called terrorism, martyrdom, suicide, human bombers, and that's discounted as legitimate. In other words, it doesn't create an imagined nation in the country in which it's where it's being opposed. It's not counted as legitimate in the eyes of the powerful, it's legitimate in the eyes of the insurgent. In other words, sacrifice in that context is an act of creation, creating the imagined nation. And the decision as to whether a sacrifice is legitimate or illegitimate rests in the hands of powerful functionaries, originally religious, but now political and even economic. In other words, cutting to the chase, sacrifice is whatever the reigning elites say it is. Now, there are several aspects of sacrifice that I want to look at today because they do relate to the gift. One is guilt and indebtedness. The other is gender, the creation of the A and the not A. The third is envy and splitting between the ethics of the private or domestic world and those of the public world. And finally, alienation and mystification. Indebtedness and guilt. In religion, indebtedness to a founding figure, a son, a grandson, or other innocent male figures who died violently, plays a major part in the ongoing rituals that maintain that social order. The sacrifice of Iphigenia, by the way, did not found a state and was not represented because the sacrifices of women don't count. That's basically. Indebtedness to a savior figure occurs from the outset, and this debt becomes the currency of theological exchange, which is a precursor to the exchange economy itself. It's Jesus in Christianity, it's Huzaim in Islam, there's Isaac in Judaism, even though that one was interrupted. Likewise, in contemporary states, indebtedness to those who gave their lives or are willing to do so, soldiers on parade with foreign dignitaries, constitute an extreme gift and indebtedness, the gift of their lives. But it's not a gift which gives something to somebody else, it's a gift which creates a superstructure, which then forms the form of mystification. Yet ancestor cults that celebrate such gifts and debts serve to construct and consolidate contemporary political relationships and hierarchies. Here in Ireland, we have a very famous political figure called Wolfe Tone. And on the anniversary of his death, there's at least 6 different political parties who take their turns to process to his grave, claiming his traditions and his legacy for their own political power. Now, when we come to neoliberal economics, indebtedness to those heroic individuals who risked their money, their time, their expertise setting up enterprises, it's another cult of the hero. And it's a seeming cult of individualism, where there's diminished collective responsibility for the less fortunate. In other words, individuals are held accountable for the quality of their lives, regardless of class, intelligence, or whatever structures of inheritance that they had. And yet, when the economic crash came some years ago, individualism went out the window. Societies as a whole were told to make sacrifices for the good of the very same society that had cultivated extreme individualism. Major Western governments reneged on the cult of risk-taking entrepreneur for the good of the collective. Banks and other monetary institutions were bailed out, and sure enough, as soon as they got on their feet again, they continue as they went on before. And so debt and guilt is never ending. It can never be erased. Guilt is passed on and debt is passed on from generation to generation. The second aspect is the question of guilt. And I go back here to Eumenides because after Clytemnestra killed Agamemnon, she was killed by her son Orestes. And the final part of the trilogy concerns the time when Orestes is being brought to judgment by the Furies and by the Chorus. And the Furies, look, they talk about the shrine Pythia's shrine, the shrine of the serpent, which held ambivalence and tension, has been taken over by Apollo. And so this is what they say: such is your triumph, you young gods. And remember, these are the young gods of ancient Greece that she's talking about, the Apollonian gods. World dominion past all rights. Your throne is streaming blood, blood at the foot, blood at the crowning head. I can see the navel stone of the earth, it's bleeding. Bristling corruption. Oh, the guilt it has to bear. Now, in other words, behind a great deal of ostensibly intelligent and rational social action lies the question of guilt. In the religious field, guilt comes from the original sin of Adam and Eve, the crucifixion of Jesus, desired by God the Father to redeem the world caused by original sin, or guilt on the part of Muslims for not saving the grandson of Muhammad, or Muhammad. In the religious field, guilt is political. In ideal circumstances, the guilt, the force of guilt for the debt incurred will secure a particular community's compliance to whatever religious or political agreements are said to have been arrived at. But the force of guilt for those who died to make our lives possible exercises an enormous burden, fueling the militarist mentality. In the economic sphere, guilt is displaced onto the poor. The poor are guilty. In some ways, another kind of an economic caste system that Western empires have instituted. The poor are guilty, they're responsible, they're liable for their own poverty. And guilt is displaced from the high-risk entrepreneurs onto the poor, the abject, who cannot afford designer clothes, the watches, the phones. They are not unemployed, they are unemployable. When it comes to psychoanalytic explanations for this, and this is where gender becomes really very important to understand what is going on when we talk about different types of guilt and sacrifice. Freud held that envy and guilt had to do with killing the father in the Oedipal conflict. He obscures other sources of guilt, especially with regard to women. Melanie Klein, his successor, talks about a pre-Oedipal complex, and she argues that ambivalence and envy and gratitude towards the mother's breast, which signifies the primordial source of life, and that infants alternate between gratitude and envy. Where we need to go then is to ask the question, if Freud identified guilt to be at the heart of the Oedipal complex, how much greater is the unconscious guilt now waiting to be harvested in the cause of the mother? When we come to envy in gender relations and its relationship to sacrifice, the feminist anthropologist talked about envy as birth, and through sacrifice, is birth done better on purpose on a higher, more spiritual level than ordinary women do it. And we can see this as it's played out in politics. Sacrificing soldiers give birth to a sacred legacy, a new political dynasty erected on the violent death of the martyr, or the life risking of the soldier, rather than the life-giving energies of the mother. The birth of the nation. This gender discourse runs all the way through the language of war. As A.E. Houseman said when he was going to war, he said, "For the calling bugle hollows, high the screaming fife replies, gay the files of scarlet follow, woman bore me, I will rise." Now, Klein's work suggests major infant trauma. She talks about envy and gratitude. But the question that we have to raise, and Darcia has raised it very acutely in her presentation, is what kind of society does such trauma exist in infants? Scholars of psychoanalysis who are in touch with indigenous forms of childrearing ask radical questions about how Western society cultivates the kind of envy and gratitude which contributes to the sacrificial social order. And they analyze the position of women in indigenous societies, the indigenous attitudes towards children and childbearing. The work of Alice Miller, Ian Gibson, Lloyd DeMause, among many others, also ask the question, what kinds of cultural charter stories and their accompanying social practices might feed or disrupt that kind of infant trauma. Some of them refer to what happened when the colonialists went into various societies. They couldn't believe that the indigenous people would not beat their children. They wrote back to their owners, the excessive love the savages bear their children. The savages prevent their instruction. They will not tolerate the chastisement of their children. Whatever they may do, they permit only a simple reprimand. Now, how does all this relate to the question of women's place in the sacrificial social order? I'm going to go on to argue that this has something to do radically with the way in which the ethics of the private sphere or the domestic sphere are utterly discounted when it comes to the public sphere, and that possibility is maintained by sacrifice. Now, although there's wide disagreement between theorists as to how to define sacrifice, there's one thing that they have all agreed on, from St. Augustine to Tertullian to St. Aquinas, up to recently Emile Durkheim, that women should be excluded from the sacrificial arenas. Women can sacrifice themselves, but that has no repercussion in the symbolic realm. It's simply not taken seriously. Sacrifice, therefore, could be on sacrificial discourse, particularly because we don't do, ostensibly, we don't do sacrificial rituals, but sacrificial discourse runs everywhere, is a form of cultural labor that facilitates splitting and which is also a form of mystification. In the public world, the male is the norm, the normative male of Aristotle and Aquinas. In the private world, the female is not A. She is derivative. She is the misbegotten male who only gets to be born when the wind blows in the wrong direction. In the public world, it's a sacred, and men are in charge of the sacred, ostensibly, because I'll come back to that. The profane world is the world of women. The public, religious, and political and economic world is in the hands of men. The private, domestic world is theoretically in the hands of women. And the ethics of the public world, ruthless individualism, greed, envy, exploitation, and hierarchies of persons entitled to the goods of this world, is quite distinct from the ethics of the private world, caring, compassion, and nurture that Jen and Darcia have so eloquently spoken of. But things are not that simple, because underneath all of this is a hidden sacrifice. In reality, the public world, as Jen has just mentioned, could not exist without drawing on the caring labor, energies, and metaphors that characterize the so-called private world. Furthermore, at the time of collective effervescence, as Durkheim calls it, or the festival, the carefully guarded religious or political figures enter the realm of the sacred only to find that it holds all that has been repressed, especially the attributes of women. In that sense, it is what Freud called the return of the repressed, which happens very explicitly at wartime. But it also happens in some ancient texts. I came across this text from an Irish source from the 12th century, and it was asking about how the communion host has to be divided. And there's a circle, and it said, okay, this part is for the priest, this part is for the bishop, this part is for the presbyters, this is for the deacons, this is for the lay people. But the part in the middle, there was a round piece in the middle. And here's what it said about this. The middle particle is that to which the mass priest goes, the figure of the breast with the secrets. Now, what breast is that? Soldiers are dying in battlefield, crying for their mothers. The chaplains report back the last words that they said, they were crying for their mothers. This is in the battlefield. And even Ataturk in Turkey, when all of the men who'd gone to fight the wars landed on Turkish soil, Ataturk took time to write back to their mothers. And here's what he said. You, their mothers, who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are at peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well. Now that maternal language, they are lying in our bosom, is not accidental. It is a particular form of appropriation of the birthing, of a new form of birthing into, but birthing through war and not through nurturance. So I'll just go back to Eumenides finally and talk about the how patriarchal mythologies through sacrificial discourse in the sacrificial social order accomplish the erasure of the mother. At the end of the Eumenides, when the jury was split as to whether Orestes was guilty for killing his mother, they were split. So Athena, they had to bring Athena onto the scene. And she arrived on the scene and she said, the first thing she said was, "No mother gave me birth. I honor the male in all things but marriage." And, you know, clearly that qualified her to act in the patriarchal world that was being established and being consolidated by the Eumenides. And at the end of the Eumenides, and this is the, again, it relates to what Darsha has just presented in relation to the splitting. She's putting the Furies, the old defenders of matricide, under the ground. And she says, "Let our wars rage on abroad with all their force to satisfy our powerful lust for fame. Give joy in return for joy, our common will for love, and hate with one strong heart. Such union heals 1,000 ills of men." Now, Athena is reflecting the fact that in public life, in the sacrificial social contract, we've never gone beyond what Melanie Klein calls the paranoid schizoid position, the kind of splitting between the public and the private world. We achieve our identities at somebody else's expense. And that has been the history of the last 2,000 years of Western culture. Envy of women is displaced through a kind of sacrificial catharsis with these words: "Let our wars be fought abroad." So the major empires, the collective trauma based on the denial, erasure of the mother and her work, and the mystification running through the public world. Sarah Ruddick wrote a brilliant book called Maternal Thinking, in which she argued to reconcile the ethics of the public world with those of the private world. But when we come to feminist theory, what can feminist theory offer? Julia Kristeva and Luce Irigaray, both feminist theorists for whom I have enormous regard, they speak about the debt, D-E-B-T, the debt. Kristeva says the body must bear no trace of its debt to nature. Irigaray said the son is unable to accept the debt of life, body nourishment, and social existence he owes the mother. And an entire history of Western thought is intent on substituting for this debt an image of the self-made, self-created man. So both Kristeva and Irigaray argue that the self-made man creates empires with never a backward look at the ground on which he is standing. But they refer to the maternal debt. To that extent, they are still within the logic of the exchange economy. Now, for that reason, the work of Genevieve Vaughan, and here's what I'll end, is extremely important in making some bridges between some of the most critical theorists in feminist work at the moment. As I said, Irigaray, Kristeva, and also Bracha, Lichtenberg, Ettinger, because Jen talks not about the maternal debt, which again increases guilt and envy and all the paraphernalia that goes with it. Jen speaks about the maternal gift. And one of my hopes is that Jen's work will begin to be taken seriously within the feminist philosophical and sociological community. In the words of Jean Baker Miller, Naomi Klein, and other distinguished feminist theorists, Jen's work, this changes everything. And there's one other thing that I will say as a feminist theologian, because having criticized sacrifice, there's also a prophetic stream that runs through the major religious traditions on which we can also draw. And that is the word of the prophets, including the words of Jesus Christ, who said, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was just wonderful to bring us back to the core Western thought and highlight the sacrifice so that we can see how we're living our lives these days and return it back to the gift, going back to what Darsha was highlighting about the evolution of every human being on the planet, and what Jen proposes as this big theory that goes back in an economic way to our expression, to our communities, to one another. I want to just remind you to put your questions in the Q&A. We have disabled the chat so that we could focus on the talks. If you have a specific question for one of the speakers, make sure that you write their names there so that they can address those at the end of all the speakers. Our next speaker is Heidi Gutner Abendroth, a mother and a grandmother. She has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Munich, where she lectured for 10 years, from 1973 to 1983. She's published on philosophy of science and extensively on matriarchal society and culture. And through her lifelong research on matriarchal societies, has become a founder of Modern Matriarchal Studies. In her magnum opus, Matriarchal Societies, Studies on Indigenous Cultures Across the Globe, she defines scientifically this new field of knowledge and provides a world tour of examples of contemporary matriarchal cultures. She has guided 3 world congresses on matriarchal studies. She's a visiting professor at the University of Montreal in Canada. Every 2 years in the United States. In 1986, she founded the International Academy of Hagia for Matriarchal Studies in Germany, and since has been the director. So welcome, Heidi.
Thank you, Letitia. Thank you so much. I'm talking about the principles of sustainable societies, matriarchy as an alternative paradigm. Most discussions about sustainability focus on a sustainable economy, and the question of what a sustainable society would like is not raised. Moreover, the fact that the economy is not independent from the form of the society is ignored. However, the most important factor in each society are humans, since through their activities, they are largely responsible for changing the earth, be it for the better or from bad to worse. It is thus crucial which model of society people have in mind. Here we can see the necessary connection between economy and research into cultures. Today, it is of utmost importance that we learn from sustainable societies. That means the matriarchal egalitarian form of society, which is based on the maternal gift economy. In matriarchal societies, the basic group of life, mothers, children, earth, is respected. This is valid in all existing indigenous matriarch societies, where motherhood as the basic group of mothers, children, earth is transformed into a cultural model that maintains the balance between genders, generations, and humans and nature. Let us have a closer look at this. Matriarchies are not just the reversal of patriarchy, with women ruling over men, as the usual misinterpretation would have it. Matriarchies are mother-centered societies because they respect motherhood as the most important function in society. They are based on maternal values which have been taken from the behavior of the prototypical mother, a nurturing, caretaking, integrative attitude, mutual assistance, perfect balance, conflict resolution through negotiating, and peace building. These values hold for everybody, for mothers and also for those who are not mothers, and for women and men alike. Matriarchal societies are consciously built upon maternal values and the work carried out by mothers. And this is why they are much more realistic than patriarchies. They are on principle needs-oriented. Their precepts aim to meet everyone's needs with the greatest benefit. Therefore, in matriarchies, motherhood, which originates as a biological fact, is transformed into a cultural model. Maternal values pervade all areas of a matriarchal society and can be observed at all levels, at the social, economic, political, and also cultural level. At the social level, matriarchal societies are based on the clan, which is led by the eldest clan mother. All clan members are her daughters and sons and her grandchildren. They live together in a large kinship group formed according to the principles of matrilineality and matrilocality. These principles put mothers at the center, and they guide their clans without ruling, by integrating the diversity of gender, age, abilities, and needs of the clan members. This also holds for the diversity of the clans of a village or town. They are linked in a mutual marriage and assistance system where there is no need for help granted from above. In this way, a non-hierarchical, horizontal society of matrilineal kinship is created. However, they perceive this order not in terms of sociology, but of spirituality. In other words, they see maternal values as spiritual principles that humans take from nature. Mother Nature is our teacher, say the matriarchal Minangkabau people of Sumatra. Mother Nature cares for all her children, plants, animals, humans, however different they may be. The same applies for the prototypical mother. She cares for all her children, embracing their diversity. We can see that through this concept, matriarchal people base their society on the elemental group of life, mothers, children, earth. This social order based on motherhood includes far-reaching consequences for the economic level. A matriarchal economy is a subsistence economy. There is no such thing as private property, and there are no territorial claims. The people simply have usage rights on the soil they till or to the pastures their animals graze. The spiritual idea behind this is that Mother Earth cannot be owned or divided up into parts. She gives the fruits of the fields and the young animals to all people as an unceasing flow of gifts. In matriarchies, women hold the power over the arrangement of goods and clan houses, and especially over the sources of nourishment. All goods are put into the hands of the clan mother, the matriarch. However, this is an economy of distribution, not of accumulation and possession, and everybody trusts that the eldest mother will distribute the goods equally among her children and grandchildren. These principles of sharing and giving are not reserved for the clan, but extended to the whole community of a village or town. At the seasonal festivals, clans that are comparatively better off will invite all the inhabitants to be their guests. This goes round in the village from one festival to the next. At these opportunities, the matriarchs appear in their most beautiful costumes, loaded with gifts, which they give away lavishly. By redistributing wealth in this way, no one stays poor. It is a mutual support system, well balanced in itself. but it is not merely seen as a profane economic arrangement, but rather as a spiritual system. At these gift-giving festivals, the matriarchs are seen as the daughters of Mother Earth, and they act in the same way as the Earth. Again, we can see that the economy following Mother Nature is also based on the model of Mother's children, Earth. Since this is a general attitude, a matriarchal economy can be called a gift economy in the true sense, as Genevieve Vaughan has formulated it in her theory. And it goes without saying that such an economy is perfectly sustainable because exploitation is not necessary to enrich the upper class. Maternal values also permeate the political level. The patterns at this level follow the principle of consensus, which means unanimity regarding each decision. To live by a principle like this in practice, a society must be specifically organized, and matriarchal societies are organized into a system of councils which are intertwined in a sophisticated network. Matrilineal kinship lines are once again the starting point, for the basis of each decision-making process is the clan house, where the people related along the mother line live. This is where the real politics takes place, which then influences the larger bodies, the village or town councils and regional councils. These latter councils are meetings of male delegates from the individual clan houses to communicate matters, but not to make decisions unilaterally. Therefore, the origin of all politics lies in the clan houses, and in this way a true grassroots democracy is put into practice. In such a political system, no hierarchies and classes and no rulers can develop, as well as no gender or generation gap. Instead, matriarchies are truly egalitarian. Minorities are not excluded by the majority, as is common in our former democracies. The spiritual idea behind this is also learned from Mother Nature, who shows that diversity is the true wealth. Matriarchal people also see it that way. Wealth is achieved through a diversity of ideas, knowledge, and contributions made to the councils. And this attitude enables them to see the many different aspects of an issue they have to decide on. The ability to listen, to respect different opinions, and to integrate these follow maternal values. This ability is demonstrated by women and men equally in the councils. The aim is to solve problems and conflicts by talking and negotiating, and to secure peace for mothers, children, and Earth. We can see that at every level, the matriarchal form of society is based on a deep and all-permeating spirituality. At the cultural level, this spiritual attitude and the maternal values, which are at its core, emerge very clearly. Matriarch societies do not have hierarchical religions based on an omnipotent male god and a degraded world despised as profane. In matriarchies, divinity is immanent, for the whole world is regarded as divine, as feminine divine. There is no split between the sacred and the profane. This is evident by the widely held concept of the universe as the great goddess who brought forth everything through birth, and of the earth as the great mother who created all living beings. and everyone and everything is endowed with divinity by virtue of being a child of the great Mother Nature. As a consequence, all is regarded as interconnected with everything else in the web of beings. Nothing is left out. Therefore, no being should be violated, because in doing so, you would be violating yourself and violating the divine web of the world. When humans have to take their food from plants and animals and have to scratch the earth while sowing, all of these violations must be healed. Therefore, hunting and harvesting is followed by ceremonies of healing, through which humans give back goods from their culture as gifts to the earth, such as songs, dances, and kinds of artifacts. In this way, the balance is restored again. In such a model, ideas of exploiting the earth cannot develop, and they are alien to matriarchal people. Matriarchal people are convinced that practices which damage and destroy nature will have repercussions for humanity, an idea which is perfectly true. These ideas and arrangements make matriarchal societies extremely sustainable, so that they, not being not at all a fiction or utopia, lived over millennia, and some of them have survived up to the present time. I have shown this in my research, which I carried out for decades. Contrary to this, patriarchal societies are blind to the challenging idea that sustainability is not just a technical, but first and foremost a social and cultural problem. It must be tackled by creating a completely different cultural model, one that puts the basic group of life, mothers, children, earth, at the center again. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Heidi. That was wonderful. The idea of mother, child, and earth, it brings all of the talks together, and the view of all the current matriarchal cultures that are available and the remnants of the matriarchal cultures that we have around the world. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Sherry Mitchell. Sherry was born and raised on the Penobscot Indian Reservation. She received her Juris Doctorate and a certificate in Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy from the University of Arizona, James E. Rogers College of Law. She was a longtime advisor to the American Indian Institute's Healing the Future program and currently serves as an advisor to the Indigenous Elders and Medicine Peoples Council of North and South America. She is the founding director of the Land Peace Foundation, an organization dedicated to the global protection of Indigenous rights and the preservation of the Indigenous ways of life. Prior to forming the Land Peace Foundation, Sherry served as a law clerk to the Solicitor of the United States Department of Interior, as an associate with Fredericks Peebles and Morgan Law Firm, a civil rights educator for Maine's Attorney General's Office, and as the staff attorney for the Native American unit of Pine Tree Legal. Sherry is the author of the award-winning book, Sacred Instructions, Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change. Welcome, Sherry.
Thank you, Letitia. It's wonderful to be with you all, and I just want to honor and acknowledge the women who have gone before me and the wisdom that they have offered to us. I'm incredibly grateful to have stumbled upon this amazing group of women several years ago, and to now consider many of them family to me, and truly sisters in this work that we're doing together. So I just want to introduce myself in my language. Andaliwisi Wanahamugwasit Najio Banawapskewi, Indel Nabamuk Owasus Nil Banawapskewi, Nagakakagus Nil Tibayik. My name is, in my language, is Wanahamugwasit, and I am from the Penobscot Nation. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Tibayik. And it's wonderful to be with you all today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the nature of our matrifocal ways of being, and to talk about these concepts of reciprocity that exist outside of what, when we think of reciprocity, we think about a give and take in relation to an exchange oftentimes, because we've been so conditioned to think about things in that way. But when we think about reciprocal sharing, we recognize that we have been born into a natural gifting economy through our natural, healthy relationship, balanced relationship with Mother Earth that is based on reciprocity. That there's this constant give and take, and we have ceremonies that acknowledge that, beginning at birth and going all the way through our lives until the time of death. And so when we're carrying our children, when the children are in our wombs, that is their first ecosystem. The body of the birth mother is the first ecosystem of the child, this holding place where they are nourished and nurtured and cultivated with what they need in order to be born into their second ecosystem, which of course is upon Mother Earth, our Nikoskikdamik. And then that Mother Earth nurtures, cultivates, and cares for the bodies of our children from that point forward until the time of their death. And then when we die, our bodies return to Mother Earth, and then we become the nourishment in the soil for the future generations. And so we have ceremonies that recognize this, that take place connected to birth, where the placenta is buried underneath a tree to recognize the continuation of our connection to that tree of life. But also the umbilical cord is buried, and that umbilical cord is buried to represent the transition from the birth mother to the earth mother, and the recognition of that mothering relationship that will then take place for the remainder of our time upon Mother Earth. And so when we look at how our ways of being have been disrupted, we can look at the beginning and at the end with those two ceremonies, where now we have to go through unimaginable hoops. And sometimes even that doesn't work, because our bodies have been identified as toxic waste. And so when we think about our relationship with Mother Earth, where we have been so made fearful of our relationship. I talk to people who grew up in the city and talk about just the beauty of being in the forest, and the amazing healing elements of just having my bare feet on the ground. And that's a whole foreign concept to them, and to many of them it's terrifying. And so when we think about the ways that we've been separated from Mother Earth, the ways that we've been convinced that the natural world is a dangerous place, the ways that we have been convinced that even the naturalness of our bodies in connection with the earth, that there's there's all of these biohazard loopholes that we have to go through to reunite our bodies with the Earth Mother, to acknowledge our connection to the Earth Mother, that there has been this systematic disruption that has been put in place to prevent us from doing that, to acknowledge the transition of our lives from the care of our birth mothers to the care of the Earth Mother. And so we have to really work at undoing that language that we have been conditioned with for those beliefs for so many generations, so that we can renew those relationships. And I feel incredibly grateful to have grown up in a culture where that is still the norm, and to have been raised by a really strong Native family who taught us about those connections and about our place within creation. And then when we think about about death when our bodies are returned to Mother Earth. In the United States and in most Western countries, the body is now pumped full of embalming fluid. And, some states require that happen because, again, our bodies are viewed as being, this toxic waste. And so our bodies are pumped full of chemicals, and then we're put into a wooden box, and then that wooden box is placed inside a cement box when we're buried. And so there's all of these layers of separation that prevent us from having that reunion of our bodies with Mother Earth. And so when we think about that symbolism of that in relation to our separation from the Divine Mother, we recognize that we have been taken away from this natural gifting economy that we were born into, this reciprocal sharing, this recognition of the continuation of the circle of life that we're a part of, because human beings in their illusions and their delusions have placed themselves outside of the circle of life and somehow believed that they were above it. And in doing so have disrupted the natural mothering relationship that is at the core. The earth herself is a matriarch. And so no matter where you are, the primary governing essence of the earth is mothering. It's a maternal economy. It's an maternal system, matriarchal, matrifocal, with the mother at the center. And that's symbolized by our umbilical cords, where at the center of our being, we are connected to the mother. And so in our traditions and in our ceremonies, we have recognition of those connections. And when we are thinking about our governance systems were established with the matriarchs at the center. So the clan mothers were at the center, and all of the decision making was brought to the clan mothers. The clan mothers would sit in circle with one another, and they would sit there and they would deliberate until they had reached an answer that honored all aspects of life. And so, we sit in a circle so that we can see things from all sides, so we can have this deep understanding of what it is that we're considering and what we're looking at. And so that we have the benefit of that full 360-degree view by allowing every voice to have some type of input into the discussion that we're having. And so when we think about that clan mother system, what the clan mothers were charged with doing was making a decision that honored the sacredness of all life, because we recognized that if we harmed the lives of others, then our lives were then in danger. If we disrupted the possibility of survival for some other, whether it be another human being or a plant or an animal, our waterways or our air, we were disrupting our own ability to survive and to sustain ourselves into the future. We recognize that in our prayers. When we end our prayers, we say, Basilda and Dilna Bamuk, I offer this for all of my relations, because we recognize that we can't do anything or have anything or request anything for ourselves without it impacting all of the relatives that we have in the natural world, which is all life. We recognize our connection to all life. And so when the clan mothers were given a decision by the chiefs and the warrior societies, they would make a decision, that sacred mask, that was a representation of that sacred feminine. The intuitive heart-based wisdom of the sacred feminine was materialized within the bodies of our clan mothers. And then that decision would be given to the chiefs and to our warrior societies, and then they would take that information and the guidance that was given to them that came from that sacred feminine, and they would put it into action out in the physical world. That's the manifestation of the sacred masculine within our governance systems. And so there was this recognition of how the universe worked, going inside for that sacred wisdom, that divine heart-based wisdom of the feminine, and then taking that masculine energy and moving it into action in the physical world was built into our governance systems. And so when we when we built our societies, we built them around that knowledge of the need for balance and recognition of the sacredness of both the feminine and the masculine. And so when the patriarchy came in and disrupted our communities, the first thing that they did was they separated out all of the feminine aspects from our communities, and they forced upon our men these patriarchal roles that were foreign to them. And so, not only were the women oppressed, suppressed, and killed oftentimes, but the men were forced to go out into the world and to function as half-formed human beings because they could not be fully whole without the presence, the guidance of that sacred feminine within them. And so we have societies that were built on this imbalance that have been proliferated and exported from the European continents that came and imposed those ways of being upon us here in Turtle Island. And then those ideas were exported to other parts of the world through colonization. So we have this colonization of our hearts and minds that has kept us in these repetitive patterns of stripping away the sacredness of the mother at the heart of our communities. And so our societies have been working to bring that back. And it's been the women who have been the ones responsible for bringing that back. And I just wanted to say a little bit about sacrifice. We had a brief conversation about this once before, and I really appreciate what Mary has done with her work around sacrifice, because I talk about sacrifice in one of the new books that I'm writing. And the way that I talk about it is understanding the distinction between sacrifice for the nourishment of the community. And so we have a lot of stories that talk about a woman sacrificing her body. The Corn Mother story is a good example, where the Corn Mother's body is sacrificed so that the people can have the corn that they need in order to survive as a nourishment for their bodies. And this is a symbolic representation of the nourishment provided to the community through a loving mother, right? Loving, mothering aspects bring nourishment and well-being to the whole community. And so that story is not a literal, story about sacrificing the body of a woman. It's an acknowledgement that it is the body of the mother, the wisdom of the sacred feminine. It is that sacred act of mothering that's imbued within our traditional ways of being that actually gives strength and nourishment to the people. And so, there's an acknowledgement of that. And then there's another story that I really like, that is the story of Sedna. And in the story of Sedna, Sedna is sold essentially to a being that turns out not to be human by her father, because her father is promised riches and safety. So this being that comes to claim Sedna promises the father, I will give you riches and I will give you safety if you give me your daughter. So there's where the exchange began, right? This is a cautionary tale because if you look at what is the first product that was put upon the exchange economy in 3000 BCE, it was the body of the woman in exchange for land, wealth, or protection. And so the story of Sedna for indigenous peoples is a cautionary tale. Don't follow this path and sell your daughters for profit or for safety. Because what happens is that Sedna turns into a sea creature and her fingers are cut off as her father's, because her father goes and takes her back from this creature because he sees how unhappy she is. But then he tries to throw her back because this creature calls up a storm that the father feels is going to threaten his life because he's in a boat on the water. And, of course, the water is symbolic of all of those emotions. And because there's no balance of that sacred feminine in there, that heart-based wisdom of the divine feminine, the father doesn't know how to deal with all of the emotions that are rolling up within him. So he tosses his daughter off into the ocean. And as she tries to cling onto the side of the boat, he cuts her fingers off and her fingers become the creatures of the sea. And so then the story says that every time the people want to go and fish and get nourishment for their community, they have to really pray to Sedna. They have to go and they have to comb her hair. They have to do all of these things to soothe her spirit from the rage that she has within her, because she has been violated by the father by having her body sold for his protection and his wealth. And so we have cautionary tales like that that talk about that in our mythology, that really guide us away from following the pathway of the patriarchy and colonization and capitalism, and advise us to stay with our own ways of being. And despite so much violence against us, we've been able to maintain some of those ways of being, which I think is really important, because when we think about violence against Indigenous women, that's ongoing, that is statistically 10 times higher for Indigenous women than for any other population on the planet, especially in the US and Canada. We can start to recognize, why is this violence against Indigenous women so powerful and so consistent? And it's because of the maintenance of that connection to those ways of being that are connected to our understanding of the sacredness of the Divine Mother. And so in the Wabanaki languages, we have all of these different words for these different roles that the women hold within the community. And my beautiful friend Mi'kamahan told me a story one time, and this always sticks with me, because I think that it's really key here, is when we look at the word for wife in the Mi'kmaq language, that word Ohari translates to the one who keeps me connected to my heart and spirit. And so when we look at that role of the mother, the one who keeps me connected to my heart and my spirit, we can see that with the absence of the mother, that our communities developed out of balance, that societies who were being led by these patriarchal ways of being developed in such an imbalanced way, because that heart-based wisdom of the mother was missing, not only from their literal physical voices and bodies being suppressed, but also that sacred feminine aspect that was given to the men was also forced to be suppressed, so that the men couldn't even walk around as whole beings, because they had that half of their being was being suppressed and having violence committed against them as well. And so we have to look at healing that balance as we're healing our relationship and developing and building this ourselves back into harmony with this natural gift economy that we were born into. And so there's a way of learning that I've come to understand when we have a word in our phrase in our language, ginamasan, which is about this balanced way of learning. We can't enter into that balanced way of learning, this holistic way of learning, without understanding the place of the mother at the center of our being, without understanding the interplay between the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. And so all of this is tied together with the development of gifting economy. And so in our communities, it has been the women who have risen up and who have reclaimed and restored our clan mother systems, called the men back to their sacred place within the circle. The women who have been reintroducing rites of passage and teaching core cultural values. And within that core cultural value is a teaching that is really at the heart of the gift economy. These two words in our language, Mama Bisu and Ala Bisu. Mama Bisu is, do you have enough? Do you as an individual have enough of what you need in order to live your life in a dignified way with a sense of safety and well-being? Ala Bisu is, does everyone have enough? And there's a recognition that Alabizu and Mama Bizu go hand in hand, because you can't have enough, in terms of Mama Bizu, if everybody doesn't have enough, because your well-being is tied to the well-being of the community. Your ability to rise up with everything that you need to be a whole human being is tied to the sense of safety and security that your whole community has. So we're deeply connected to one another through these principles. And so I think about how I was fortunate enough to see this in action. My grandmother was an important person in my life, one of the most important people in my life. My grandparents had a huge role to play in raising me. And what my grandmother would do is she would wake me up before the sun came up, and she'd get me all bundled up, and she'd give me something, whether it was a bag of food, winter boots, clothes, what have you. And she'd tell me, I want you to go, and I want you go through the woods, and you go up to this person's house, and I want you to leave this on their door. And I don't want anybody, don't you let anybody see you coming or going. And then you come back here. And so I would, go and do my task. And in the wintertime, she even give me a big tree branch so I could wipe away my footprints, so that nobody would be able to trace where I came from, and she'd be telling me the back route to go to get to this person's door without anybody seeing me, and with the ability to be able to wipe away my footprints so that nobody would know where I was coming from. And I asked her one time, I said, Graham, why don't you just give these people these gifts? And she said that I don't want them to be embarrassed when they see me on the street. And so she knew that there was this sense of dignity that was not being preserved by the ways of being that were becoming prominent within our communities. And she wanted to restore that dignity to them, to ensure that they had enough without feeling like they were charity. Because that whole concept of being a charity case was foreign to us. But being charitable was something that was imbued within our cultural traditions and ways of being. And so, I learned from a very early age that, there was this need to be able to lift everyone up so that everyone was kind of in the same place. Because what happened when somebody had the food that they need, when somebody's bills were paid, they had a safe roof over their head, when they had enough food, when they had enough dignity to hold their head up and to stand tall in their community, when they felt that there was some security for them and a sense of belonging, that they were able to offer the gifts that they had with the world more freely. And that when that happened, we all benefited from that. And so I feel like I'm very fortunate to have been raised with that understanding. And so I have been working with the matriarchs here on this call for the last 6 or 7 years on a lot of these issues. And I found this natural kinship with Jen through her writing about the maternal gift economy, because what it's explaining or trying to explain is a way of being that is a fundamental part of who I am as Skidgenowi Apit, as an Indigenous woman. And so I have this understanding, and I can see what that looks like tangibly in my world, because I've had these experiences of recognizing it. Another thing that our community always did was they would have what's called a pound party. And so when somebody was a new parent, when they were newly married, the whole community would come together and have a pound party for them. And what that meant was they would give them a pound of something, a pound of sugar, a pound of flour. The whole community would do that. So by the time they were done, the person, nobody had to give more than they could afford to give, right? But everybody gave a little bit, and then the person had an abundance of what they needed in order to be okay. And so having these early understandings of what that does to support a community and to support individuals. I've had the good fortune of being able to develop, or am in the process of developing, a kinship community here on this 200-acre farm that I've recently reclaimed in our territory. And the name of the community is Wajukum Tultina. Wajukum Tultina means we help one another, or let's help one another. And this community is based on principles of the maternal gift economy, where there is a practice being developed that whatever is grown here, whatever we cultivate here, whatever rises up here, we are going to share with others. So we're going to make sure, Mama Bisu, that we have what we need to be able to be okay. And then whatever else we have, we share with the surrounding communities and with other community members to make sure that everyone has enough. This also instills, has naturally built into the process, necessity for cooperation and collaboration, because if everybody was growing the same thing, then we'd have a whole lot of one thing, but not all of what we need. So we have to collaborate and cooperate with others in order to make sure that everyone has a variety of the things that they need to be able to survive. And so, collaboration and cooperation is what allowed our humanoid species to survive when all of the others failed. It's also naturally nonviolent. And so when we think about all of the matrifocal learning that has come from our way of life, and this way of being in relationship to the world, it's naturally aligned with a maternal gifting economy. And a maternal gifting economy is naturally aligned with the natural gift economy that we were born into through this reciprocal relationship with Mother Earth. And that's all tied together. And so I wanted to have the opportunity to give a snapshot of what that might look like. And we can talk a little bit more about it in the Q&A if people have questions. But I want to thank Jen and all of the others who have helped to coordinate this, Letitia for moderating this panel. Thank you all for giving us the opportunity to come together from these different places and to share this real common sense way of being, because one of the things that we've discovered is that, when we have these ways of being, this mother love in gifting, Jen talked about how, the exchange economy creates this adversarial, unhealthy competition between us. And I say unhealthy competition because we had a healthy competition in our traditions. Healthy competition allows us to work together to increase our strength, our agility, our skill set. It's always friendly and supportive. And it's never a determinant of well-being within the society. For instance, our forms of competition never determined whether or not you were going to be fed or housed. Our form of competition never determined whether or not you were going to be accepted and have a sense of belonging. And so unhealthy competition forces those kinds of decisions. So we have this whole capitalist system, this exchange economy that is based on unhealthy competition, where somebody's actual ability to be able to live is called into question as a result of it. And that is toxic, that is unnatural, and it's not part of who we were meant to be as human beings. But when we actually have these healthy ways of being instilled into our way of life, when we have mother love and gifting, it creates this mutuality and trust. It creates a sense of space and a grounding within individuals so that they are better able to share their gifts with the world. And so when we think about it in that regard, mothering, even when we have maybe not been mothered that way ourselves, mothering and gifting outside of an expectation of return, but simply as an act of mother love for the well-being of the recipient and or the entire community, it creates a healing of the place within us that cries out for mothering. And when we are all offering that to one another, we can mother one another back into wholeness and allow our community members, our family members, to emerge into the world fully intact and able to offer the gifts that they were born to give the world. And so the importance of this work is really can't be stressed enough in my mind that and in my heart, that there is a place for this conversation, not just in the fringes, but in the very core of our societies in the mainstream. And so, I'm very thankful to have been a part of it, and that's what I want to offer for now. So, Kachi Wiliwan and Pasilda and Dilnabamuk, I offer this up for all my relations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. That was just beautiful. Sherry is a living example of a tradition that has thrived in the midst of adversity. And in honor of this month of Native American heritage and history in the United States of America, we're just really happy that you could join us. And it's so vitally important because one of the things that I recognized when I first attended Jen's International Gift Economy Conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, was that Jen did have both theorists, Europeans, and indigenous people, so that the theorists could speak about a culture, but the indigenous people spoke from inside their culture. And speaking from inside your own culture is so very different, which is why the work of Heide is so critical, because she speaks from inside the culture of where she is in Germany, of the ancient mothering there. So does Mary Condren, and Darcia and Genevieve bring us into this whole view of what it means to integrate all of these pieces together of who we are being in the world and what it means fundamentally to be a human being. And that primary orientation with mothers and children at the center is vitally important for the healing and understanding of how we can actually create a peaceful, sustainable society. And Jen's theory of the gift economy is what it means to be able to be in relationship to the earth, Mother Earth, as the primary place where we live, as our home. And when we live in one home, we are one family. And with that, I would like to welcome our next speaker, Vandana Shiva. Vandana Shiva was trained as a physicist and did her PhD in quantum theory, the hidden values of non-locality in quantum theory, from the University of Western Ontario in Canada. She later shifted to interdisciplinary research in science, technology, and environmental policy, which she carried out at the Indian Institute of Science, the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. In 1982, she founded the Independent Institute, the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology in Dehradun, dedicated to high quality and independent research to address the most significant ecological and social issues of our time, in close relationship and partnership with local communities and social movements. In 1991, she founded Navdayana, a national movement to protect the diversity and integrity of living resources, especially native seeds, the promotion of organic farming, and fair trade. In 2004, she started Bija Vidhayapta, an international college for sustainable living in Doon Valley in collaboration with Schumacher College in the UK. Dr. Vandana Shiva combines sharp intellectual inquiry with courageous activism. Welcome, Vandana.
Thank you. It's a joy to be with all of you. And thank you, Jen, for triggering this gathering. Thank you to all the beautiful sisters who've gone before me. Over these 5 decades of both trying to understand nature, how nature works, including how nature works at the quantum level, from the tiniest of molecules to the entire universe, and how at every level there is not just quantum coherence, but there is quantum relatedness. Non-separation was my PhD thesis. And yet you've got the capitalist patriarchy, especially of the last 500 years, assuming that humans are separate from nature, assuming that nature is dead. And whether you look at the witch hunts, or you look at Bacon writing a book called The Masculine Birth of Time. Masculine birth of time. Why? Because till then nature was recognized as alive and women were recognized as the knowers. And to destroy women's knowledge and nature's life and transform Terra Madre, the living earth, our mother earth, to Terra Nullius, the empty dead earth, is really the edifice on which the violence against the earth, the violence against women, the violence against indigenous people has all been founded. I tried to understand the roots of this violence, both because I was involved in activism, beginning with an amazing movement of women from the mountains in the Himalaya in the 70s. You know, I saw the forest go and I decided to do everything to protect my Himalayan forests, my home. And it was the women from the villages who came out and said, we're going to hug the trees. The movement was called Chipko. Said, we're going to hug the trees and you'll have to kill us before you kill our mothers. And I think the whole discussion on sacrifice is part of mothering, where it is a gift, and sacrifice as austerity, as structural adjustment, where those who've been taking say, you must pay for the crisis that we have created. I work on seeds. Navdanya, the word basically means 9 seeds, diversity, but pronounced in a slightly different way, Navdanya. Dan is gift in our language. And that unconditional gift from love is what weaves the entire universe. It weaves societies and indigenous societies, and its rupture is at the root of all the hierarchies, but also at the root of the climate emergency, the extinction emergency, the COVID emergency. Everything can be traced back to this mindset. Let me share with you, because, you know, we're privileged to have Sherry and others. I decided to go back to, you know, I'd written Staying Alive in the 80s. And then when our biodiversity was being stolen and patented, I wrote a book called Biopiracy. And I think, Jen, you were involved in the Basmati biopiracy, right? When I visited Texas and we did some actions. And basically, I think from colonialism to neoliberalism to the current 1% economy, we've actually gone way beyond exchange. We've gone into one-way extraction, no giving at all. And the billionaires are now working on something they call the zero-cost economy, where they will never have to pay anything. Our taxes will be collected from us to subsidize them, to create markets where there are no markets. And this issue of patenting is actually a continuity of what started with colonialism. You know, the 4 elements of an extractivist economy for me is, first, you declare nature as dead. Second, you enclose the commons. There's been so much talk on the community. You privatize and you create ownership where there was no ownership, there was no private property. And John Locke, who's treated as the person who taught us exactly what property is about and what governance is about, he writes that the mixing of labor with nature creates property. But it is not the labor of women or the animal or the serf. It is the spiritual labor manifested in capital. And this mixing up of controlling money as spiritual and degrading the sacred earth as dead matter, degrading our sacred bodies, our sacred work, our sacred gifts as passivity, as nothing is happening, as total objectification. And Winthrop went further. He said natives in New England, they enclose no land. That's their primitiveness. Neither have they settled habitations, nor do they have tame cattle. They don't improve the land. So they have a right to survive, and we can take the rest. From these enclosures comes extractivism. So I think what we've lived through now for 500 years of colonialism is extractivism. The theory of it is exchange. The reality of it is the violence of one-way extraction. And then this one-way extraction ends up taking non-stop from nature limitlessly and taking non-stop from our bodies, our work, taking non-stop the surplus labor that Jen mentioned. And beyond a point, extraction ends up creating these inverted pyramids. And I've just done a book called Oneness versus the 1%, to try understand the phenomena of these new billionaires. And interestingly, they're taking the whole pretense of giving to a new level. So the oneness versus 1%, I started looking at what Bill Gates was doing because he was in Paris, dictating to the heads of state how they should address climate change with more commodification, geoengineering, manipulate the entire planet, genetic engineering, patenting more seeds, everything that we have shown to actually be at the root of the problem. Gates was offering it as the solution. And if you look at Navdanya International's website, you will find our recent report on the gates to a global empire. I say this because Bill Gates pretends he gifts, but he's very clever. What he does is he dangles a little carrot to the WHO, to the FAO, to the CGIAR, to all our public institutions, our governments. And then he encloses the commons of the public goods, of public governance, and turns these into new colonies. One of the new colonies he's created totally of his making is the language of gene editing. In the gift economy, giving is self-organized. And the relationship between giving and receiving is what creates self-organized systems. Some people have been writing in the question and answer about Maturana. Maturana and Varela gave us the brilliant thinking about self-organized complexity. Self-organized complexity evolves out of giving. The self-organized complexity is what is disrupted when Mr. Gates decides to say, I am turning all of life into a word program. And I'm going to cut it and chop it and edit it. Gene editing. He funded the research. Doudna, who got the Nobel this year, basically he funded her research. And then he created a company called Editas, which takes patents on gene editing. The European Court of Justice has ruled this is a GMO and should be regulated. Every scientific research on it has shown that because of this highly complex system, of life, of giving at every level. Basically, when you change one gene, you're not writing a word program. You're actually scrambling 1,500 genes. When you try and make hornless cattle, you create cattle with new bacterial genes. And the research is all there, hundreds and thousands of papers. And yet, because they've created an insular empire, and I have watched, I mean, if Bacon said the birth of masculine time, or the masculine birth of time, in a way, these pretend givers of today, the philanthrocapitalists, I even called him a philanthro-imperialist, they're basically going even further. Bacon said we have to subjugate nature. I don't think most of you are aware that Google, who's basically taken over everything, they've stolen all our books, they steal all our minds, the Facebooks, yeah. They first turned the earth into raw material. They turned the forests into raw material. My work on saving seeds has been preventing the seed, which is such an amazing source of giving. One seed gives us 1,000 seeds, 1,000,000 seeds, and abundance. This is the gift economy of abundance. This is what I've dedicated my life to the last 33 years and fought patenting of seed. Now, the latest raw material is us. I mean, women's bodies were always treated as raw material. But now every human being is being treated as raw material for mining our brains and our bodies. And there's a very, very good book I would request all of you to look at. It's called Surveillance Capitalism, on the reduction of the human being to the new raw material. And it's an amazing system of extraction. Where we are extracted from, our data is manipulated and sold back to us as a commodity, as big data, sold back to us to manage our behavior. Have you seen how the language of behavioral change, the gift economy is behavioral change from within because of your love. The behavioral change they're talking about is the next external input, the next external manipulation, the next external control. So I say, the first time around, they said the earth is dead, terra nullius. Then they wanted to patent seed. I called it bio nullius. They said, I fought cases with Monsanto, where Monsanto's lawyers actually stood in the Supreme Court of India, and that seed is an empty container. It's what we put into it that makes it come alive. And this illusion, I wrote about it in Biopiracy, and I'll cite it. It's Jakob Bakoven. The triumph of paternity brings it with it the liberation of the spirit from the manifestations of nature, a sublimation of human existence over the laws of material life. Maternity pertains to the physical side of man, the only thing he shares with the animals. The paternal spiritual principle belongs to man alone. As if there is no sacredness in nature, as if there's no sacredness in the soil, as if there's no sacredness in all of life on earth, but most importantly, as if women are not the true spiritual beings of this world. You can't be engaged in unconditional giving without a deep spiritual core. That, to me, this relating from love is deep spirituality. And he goes on to say, triumphant paternity partakes of the heavenly light, while childbearing motherhood is bound up with the earth that bears all things. Yeah, we admit we are bound up with the earth, and so are you, Mr. Bakoven. You might deny it, but being tied up with Mother Earth and receiving her gifts is what makes for your life, our life, everyone's life. So the latest, of course, is mente nullius, empty minds. And it's not an accident. I think it would be so good for all of you who study this phenomena of brute, violent, patriarchal power, working against the earth, working against women, working against humanity, working against our future. So Mr. Google, they've created a new life sciences division 5 years ago. The earth is 4 billion years in evolution of life. Human society is 200,000 years. Most of that time, they were based on mothering and the gift. Colonialism is the war of capitalist patriarchy against those indigenous cultures. And that crude colonization, the violent colonization, is now coming in technological garb. And the Life Sciences Division, the head of the Life Sciences Division, recently said, we have to defeat Mother Nature. And this will to conquer, the will to conquest, is still continuing, just in new ways, with new tools. But extraction and domination and separation are still the guiding force. And for us, it is giving and the gift. And in my, I do a lot of ecological research. I have watched when farmers give to the earth, we get more food. When we give seeds to each other, we have seeds. Otherwise, we have seed famine. If we give back water to the soil, we have more water. If we have air to breathe, water to drink, food to eat, it's all a result of the gift economy. And we know this, but science is having to recognize it. All of ecological relationships are about gift. And giving creates abundance. Otherwise, it's not an accident that indigenous cultures had abundance. And colonized, industrialized, globalized economies have created misery and poverty, including in the richest land. Look at America with food deserts. Look at the fact that they're talking about 99% will be useless. So a lot of people think, oh, but isn't it too late to think that we can create societies of the gift economy? My reading is when 99% of humanity is told you are useless people, when 70, 80% of the species can be pushed to extinction, this is the moment where the gift economy says, no, everyone matters. And through giving, we can create systems which have a place for the tiniest of microbes. We are walking microbes. We are viromes and biomes. In our gut are 100 trillion microbes, 100 trillion. We are only 10% of us. And therefore, we are interbeings. We are not insulated atoms. We are not insulated from society. We are community. We are not insulated from other life. We are ecological interconnectedness happening to have an expression and embodiment of a human form. So thank you, Jen. The gift economy is the future. Otherwise, there is no future for most people. And even these people, I think you pointed out that those who destroy the gift economy actually are parasites on it. So these parasites who think we don't live and we don't die, we'll be transhumans who live forever, we will be appendages to machines who will decide through algorithm what our value is, they too depend on the mothering of nature, their mothers, and the mothering of society. And their denialism doesn't take it away. It is still the foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. that takes us into this really, I love this image of walking 100 trillion microbes. It has an expression of a human form. That's just beautiful image. It just sort of brings it all together in relationship to the earth. Jen, before we open it up to questions and answers, did you have any comment that you'd like to put forward right now?
I want to thank everybody. I am totally inspired. And I realize that you can all see a lot of what I see. That is that there is this gift economy that permeates everything. And we just have to get back to it in order to, and throw off the whole parasite in order to save this this marvelous species that's yet we are, and all the marvelous species of the earth that we're destroying now. And I really believe we can do it. And it's just, thank you so much, each one of you, for all of the things that you've said that are so significant and true. And thank you, Vandana, particularly for your inspiration and your understanding of this other paradigm, but all of you too have got a handle on the other paradigm. And for me, that is the best thing that could possibly come out of this meeting. And I hope that all the people that have come to and are there listening and watching, I hope that you will also be as inspired as I am tonight. Thank you, everyone.
So I want to remind everyone, thank you, Jen, that we have scheduled salons beginning December the 5th. And they will be on a Saturday, every other Saturday, that will include speakers from the International Gift Economy. And they will be researchers, and will have examples of living experiments, meaning people who have created a modern matriarchal village, Nashira, and other things. So we want to remind you to continue to follow our website, which is maternalgifteconomy.org, and stay updated on where we will be in the future. Each of the speakers will be returning to a salon that we have planned sometime in the future to have a longer talk and more informal discussion so that you can speak with them informally. So with that, I'd like to begin with the questions. And we have 3 women. I want to thank them: Liliana Wilson, Joan Seshan, and Judith Walk, who have been gathering the questions and will pose them to the panelists. So let's begin. And we only have about an hour. So again, I want to invite you back to the salons where we can discuss these questions even deeper.
Hi, everyone. I have the first question, which is for Jen Vaughn. And Jen, this is from Suzanne Taylor, and she asks, is the logic of the gift economy enough to bring it to bear? In other words, if you were the benevolent ruler of the world, how would you bring people to a place where they would drop their current perspective and adopt yours, to where people care about each other as much as they care about themselves, and thus happily participate in the gift economy?
Oh, thank you for this question. I think that if I were if this benevolent person or spirit or something, what I would do I would create a COVID pandemic and a economic crash, because I think that what's happening now is pushing us to realize that what we have been doing has not worked, and it never will work, and it's hurting everybody. And so we need to go from there into something else, and that something else is right in front of us in mothering and in the gift economy and in the gift of the earth, all of the gifts of the earth that we're destroying as we try to manage to live through capitalism. And so I think it's happening now. I think this is already the time in which we are moving towards the gift economy, even though it looks totally opposite as from what is reality around us.
Thank you, Jen. Can we have the next question?
Sure. Here's another question for Jen from Ileana Berger. How does one protect against giving without self-care? Women tend to give, to please, and give their vital force away. How do you take that into consideration?
Well, I think that we need a theory of the gift economy that sort of shows the negative sides of it as well as the positive, and in the sense that we overgive because the capitalism in which we are embedded is not giving us anything. It's taking from us all the time. And so we have to give too much if we're going to maintain some kind of a gift practice. And, I mean, and it's very self-destructive. If we had a different kind of society where the individual was taken care of and the collective was taken care of as well, that would be the way. It was just, I was just listening to the speech of the vice president-elect of Bolivia. And he had this beautiful discourse about all of how people take care of each other in his indigenous culture. And he sounded like he was talking about the gift economy and about people who had lived it and so had those values. So I think it's a question really of the values that come out of capitalism are anti-gift, they're corrosive. And I think that women try to live it anyway, gifting anyway, because they learn it from their mothers and they learn it through their own mothering, and they don't get alienated by the patriarchal values or by the exchange economy as much as men do, although they do also get alienated. And men, I always talk about motherers, that is, men can also mother, and they need to, and we all need to be motherers. All human beings need to be motherers and practice gift giving. And it's just that capitalism is not allowing us to do that.
Thank you, Judith. Do you have a question for us?
These are questions for Darcia. I've grouped together several questions because they're all on the same topic. They're all questions about how do you fix what's broken. Natalie asks, what do you advise to women who've experienced non-nested childhood? Teresa asks, how do we fix the nest once time has passed? Can we nurture adults who have had a degraded nest? Balin asked, where can we find tools for adults? And Cassandra from the other side asks, what can a mother do to heal a bond with a child that has been taken from her?
All right, thank you for those. And thanks again for letting me be in on this important conversation. It's really an honor. We at evolvenest.org are organizing self-nesting tools. We have several up already and we're developing more of them. And I think, so there's two basic ones I would start with. And one is, well, there's so many actually. So self-calming, that's our new nesting tool, will be coming out, I think, next week. But we have 28 days of things you can do to calm yourself, and then find the ones that work for you. We have 28 days of nature connection. So building your connection with the natural world to start to treat it as a partner rather than as a dead object of some sort or full of objects. So, but I think what I usually recommend, primarily if you've been unnested, is to play. So when you play in the moment, social play, playing chase or tag, running around with, especially with young children, it actually builds and develops your right hemisphere, which is what we undermine in our unnested early years, is that ability. The right hemisphere governs all sorts of self-regulatory systems, empathy, and the ability to actually develop receptive intelligence connecting to the natural world. So playing is probably the best thing to do. It's probably culturally distinctive or difficult sometimes. Adults think they shouldn't play because of their dignity. So you have to work around that in some cultures. And if there is a bond that hasn't developed or that got, there's primal wounds. I write in my blog for Psychology Today, and we're going to put these into books for people at evolveness.org. I write about the primal wound and how to heal it, how to self-actualize when you've been sort of shut down in your life. And we have a number of posts on those kinds of things. Now, in terms of a mother-child relationship, these are, of course, unique situations. So it's hard to give particular advice, except, and it depends on the ages and all, how long and what happened. And so that's very difficult, again, to get to playing together. If there's a way to, that's a different mindset. When you're in the playing mode, it opens you up. When mammals play, which is part of our heritage, you have to be sensitive to your partner in the playing, or they'll give up on you, right? If you're too aggressive or something, and you have to be, and you build in this receptacle, in a way, gift giving, back and forth of being silly, and that kind of play is really very healthy. And there's a book you could look at called Playful Parenting, which is oriented to healing the child's attachment if they have an insecure attachment, which is one way we measure how well early childhood has gone. And so that might be something to use. So just a few ideas. Thanks.
Thank you, Darcia. Liliana, do you have a question for us?
Yes, I have a question from Simona Padovani for Mary Condren. She says, thank you, Mary Condren. I would like to read more about her analysis of the paradigm of sacrifice. What about some reading recommendations?
Well, thank you for asking the question. I don't know where to start. On my website, which is attached to Trinity College, there's a lot of my articles, and I would maybe most theorists on sacrifice don't deal at all with gender, and I think what I can bring to this issue is the relationship between the sacrificial rituals and their way of constructing the mystifying alienations that are part of our superstructure, and how it relates to gender. There's really only one person who wrote about it before. She was a woman called Nancy Jay, and she wrote a book called Throughout Your Generations Forever, Sacrifice, Paternity, and the Patriarchs. She was a brilliant woman. I met her when I was at Harvard, but she wouldn't let her book be published until after her death because she knew the kind of backlash it would get, because it's getting at the heart of patriarchal thinking. Her book has come in for some criticism, but I find it very, generalized in some areas, but I find it very inspiring. I wrote my doctoral thesis on sacrifice, which has not been published. There is an article in 1995 called Sacrifice and Political Legitimation, the Construction of a Gendered Social Order. That's in the Journal of Women's History. That's on my list. And I've written some other ones on Freud and Melanie Klein in relation to war and violence, which also draw on that kind of work. But I found probably I didn't finish my book, which I was structuring around the story of the Eumenides play. because I find working on sacrifice and gender and violence just absolutely toxic. And I really needed to find another way of feeding my spirit, which is why I started working on Bridget, because I noticed there was another question in the chat asking me about Bridget. And the opposite to sacrifice is mercy. And that comes through in all of the major religious traditions, but mostly by the prophets, who were usually vilified during their lifetimes, even though they were respected after their death. And one of the issues in relation to Bridget and in relation to recuperating the Indigenous Irish situation, which is also a way of critiquing the sacrificial mentality, is looking at the rituals. And in one of the rituals one of the sources that I found about Bridget is, we put out the cloak on the 1st of February. And we also put it out on the 1st of May at the quarterly ritual festivals. And the idea is to absorb the dew of the earth. And I have written an article actually on the dew of mercy versus the blood of sacrifice, which is not on the reference is on the website, but I haven't been able to put the article on because somebody owns it. I don't own it, didn't get a penny for it, but I don't own it anyway. But it's the reference is in a book, a journal called Feminist Theology. But just in relation to reclaiming the whole structure of mercy, which Bracha Lichtenberg-Ettinger, who's an artist psychoanalyst, she talks about it as womb love. The translation of the Hebrew is literally womb love. So it's a direct contrast to the work of sacrifice. And I know that other people have different ways of using that word sacrifice. And that's part of the problem, because we found when you work in, trying to recuperate old Europe or old Ireland, that the similarity of the words that we use, such as sacred and altar and sacrifice and holy and all of those things, conceals radical differences in their meaning and content. And for instance, I quoted Athena, who came onto the stage in the Eumenides and said, no mother gave me birth. But when I was doing my research, I found there are plentiful sources that talk about how the ancient Greeks every year made the cloak of Athena. And they also had the dew carriers who carried the dew back into the earth. And so all we have of that tradition are the trace hauntings. In Ireland, a lot of the written work, for instance, is not, has been written by the winners about the losers, and is subjugation literature. And in order to get back to a theology or a philosophy of mercy, we really have to go back to the living traditions and to the rituals and other sources that can begin to recuperate an alternative worldview. So thank you for the question, and I could just refer you to my articles on academia.edu, or if you want to write to me privately, I can maybe converse with you a little further on recommendations.
Thank you, Mary. For those of you viewing and those of you listening now, the contact information for all of our presenters and longer bios are actually on our website, maternalgifteconomy.org. And you'll be able to link back to each of these speakers and their own individual works. So, Joan, do you have another question for us?
Yes, I have a question for Haida. Well, hi, Haida. First, I have a comment. Leo Hegarty said that Haida's entire voice and demeanor exudes truth and justice. It was a gift to hear her. And I have a big question for Haida. This is from Anna Bazzoni, who's in Berlin. And she says, I don't understand why patriarchy has been so successful and widespread over the last few millennium. What do you think about this?
Now, this is a huge question, how patriarchy came into being and how it could spread in such an everywhere. And there exist a lot of answers, but I think these answers are not well grounded. For when we want to explain this shift from the matriarchy paradigm to the patriarchy way of life, we have to go deep into archaeological material and other material to give a solid and a valid answer. And I am occupied with this answer, to find this answer since many decades. And what I can say in short, you cannot give an answer in short, for at every continent, in every cultural region, at different times, there were a bundle of different factors which brought about the first patriarchal patterns. This is difficult. This is really a scholarly research which lasts, which takes a lot of time. I have explained it now based also on Maria Gimbuta's archaeological work. I have explained it for the Eurasia steppes and Europe. And this is quite different, the development from the development in Mesopotamia, where the first state buildings came up due to different factors which brought about patriarchal societies. This question must be answered in very different ways. So we have no one factor for all times, everywhere, for every people. When the answers look like that, then you have a pseudo answer. And I want to go on to show how it came up in Africa, how it developed in East Asia and other cultural regions of the world. But I asked you for your patience. This is really a huge scholarly task to answer it on the basis of the facts we can have from these early periods. It has nothing to do, to say something in short, it has nothing to do with the deficiencies of the former form of society, which I call matriarchal. It has to do with problems and with pressure from outside. At first, the first pressure from outside might have been ecological and climate change in a huge area, which we think has been taken place in the Eurasian steppes, which uprooted a lot of societies, and also, yes, which had to find a new way to survive, which became violent. But then, when the first patriarchal patterns have developed, maybe in Mesopotamia, in East Asia, Africa, everywhere, on different factors, then they put pressure on their neighbors. Then the pressure which came at first from nature is transformed in pressure from neighboring societies which are patriarchal and which put pressure on their surroundings. And this might be the clue how patriarchal societies could spread. This is not a matter of course. How they could spread, because when they put pressure on neighboring matriarchal societies, those who do not defend themselves are conquered and overthrown. And those of them who try to defend themselves and did it need a class of warriors and of fighting. And so from this pressure, they change from within, because this pressure from neighboring patriarchal societies did not stop. So please have some patience. A well-grounded explanation is on the way. I published it in German at first, how patriarchal patterns came up in Europe, Eurasian steppes, Europe and Mesopotamia. And I want to continue this work. Of course, I publish at first in German because I'm a German scholar, but this book is translated into English, and I hope that it will be available to international audience. Thanks for your question.
Thank you, Heidi. That was wonderful, short, condensed version of a very large question. So very
large question.
Very big question. And we look forward to more of your written work in English and also in German. So thank you so much. Judith, do you have another question for us?
This is a question for Sherry from Mariam. I really appreciate the way you were framing decision making that honors all of life as being orientation of circles of Indigenous women in some matrifocal societies. I think sometimes people try and emulate this by acting with lots of care for the possible impacts of their actions, which unfortunately often can result in actually separating from life out of fear of impacting others, where they end up being afraid to act. Can you talk about what it means to honor all of life and relations in circumstances in which there might be negative individual impacts on specific creatures or people? To use what might be a low stakes example, eating meat means that specific animals will die, but I imagine that many Indigenous perspectives wouldn't view eating meat as not honoring life. I'm very curious about your perspective on this.
Geez, another small question, right? This is an incredibly big question. And I think that we do these kinds of questions injustice when we try to answer them in sound bites. And so I appreciate the offerings that the other women have been giving with the questions that they've been asked. You know, I think that one of the challenges for us is in changing the way that we have been trained to assign ideas of right and wrong. And so, for instance, if we use the example of eating meat, we have a tradition of hunting and gathering in my community. In fact, I just have somebody who hunts for my family, who we offer tobacco and other spiritual gifts to that individual who's agreed to hunt. We all pray about the hunt, that the animal that will be feeding our family will not be a mother or a young mother, that caring for the young, that there will be element of a lifelong lived already, and that there will be a mutually beneficial exchange, I guess, which is what we're trying to avoid here, but there will be a mutually beneficial relationship. My dog is really excited about these ideas, as you can tell, that will be established through the giving of the meat for the family. And also, taking responsibility for gifting back to that population. So doing something that will help to support the thriving of the population of moose within our territory. And so within our ceremonies, within our traditions and cultural practices, there's a recognition. It's the same when we're harvesting medicines from our relatives in the plant world, that we always go in and we gift and we water and offer something to a plant that we want to be able to harvest medicine from. And we, offer something to help support and nurture that particular plant. And then we harvest from the one next to it. So we're offering our support for the continuation of the life of that living being, recognizing that there is something that's being given to us. We're gifting something back to the continuation of that particular species. And so there's this recognition, a prayerfulness, cause and effect understanding about the relationship that we have. But also, really actively making sure that what we're engaging in is a relationship where we honor the sacredness of that life and where we support the continuation of that community. And so we're supporting the continuation of the community of whatever species it is that we're engaged in. There is stories here that many of you have probably seen about when the settlers came, they hunted the buffalo to near extinction, where there's images of these thousands of buffalo carcasses that are piled up, that these settlers had killed, so much so that it would be impossible for them to be able to distribute those within a timely manner, and to be able to ensure that there was honor being given to those animals whose lives were taken. That is a concept that really makes our hearts bleed as Penobscot, as Skitchinawak people, because we understand that the taking of another life in that way is a sacred thing, that there is a sacred relationship that's being entered into. And so when I asked somebody to hunt for our family, I went out and I offered prayers to make sure that the situation, the scenario where that moose that came to our family, that's going to be feeding our family for the next year, that moose would be at an ideal time in their lifespan to offer that gift to us. And so I think it's really thinking about the ways that we've been taught to view things has to shift. And so if somebody's not a person who is raised in a cultural understanding that's connected to that way of being, that's a hunter-gatherer way of being, that's vegetarian or vegan and is making those decisions for moral reasons, has only seen a relationship that's based on exploitation and excess and violence in many ways. There's not an understanding of a more loving relationship that's a part of this reciprocity that's being instilled within our relationship with one another as we're moving in that direction. And so I think that it's really about a mindset shift that can't really be answered in a short way, that has to be part of a larger conversation of really decolonizing our minds and our hearts, understanding that we live in a cause and effect universe, that when we get down to understanding those foundational laws of the universe and how they interact with and engage with us every moment of every day, and that we are part of this ongoing process, and really understanding what that means in the interactions of our daily lives is something that would take a very long time for us to be able to discuss and to have it be a meaningful discussion. So anything that I can say about that in a soundbite is going to sound trite. So maybe this would be a good concept for us to really dive into during one of the salons. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Sounds like a great idea. That's another big question. Liliana, do you have another question for us?
Yes, I do. I have a question from Laura Rendon to Vandana Shiva. She says, "Thank you, Vandana, for your illuminating presentation. Can you comment on the advent of artificial intelligence and its potential to violate the sacredness of nature? Are we being given a gift or a bomb?"
The word intelligence is derived from the Latin roots interlegere, the ability to choose. When I put a seed into the soil, the seed chooses how it will put its roots down, how it will put its sprout up. And I have worked with scientists who actually look at the difference in fertile soils, organic soils, chemical soils, Roundup ready soils. There's choice happening. When Roundup is sprayed on a weed and it becomes a super weed, it is using its intelligence to evolve resistance to Roundup. Or when bacteria evolve antibiotic resistance, that evolution of choice and adaptation is intelligence. And so many of the presentations, we could make a list of empathy, cooperative intelligence, compassionate intelligence, all of those multiple kinds of intelligences that come from the gift economy and gift giving. What is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is taking one part of our brain, the left, some functions of it, the analytic, downloading it into data, into a machine. Its other name is machine learning, and then downloading that machine back into us as if that is a superior intelligence to our multiple intelligence and the intelligence of the plants and the microbes and the animals and the earth as a living intelligent system, and the universe as an intelligent, self-organized system. So I would basically say, like so much else, like colonialism and its civilizing mission, when you were basically exterminating indigenous people, artificial intelligence and the narrative of inevitability that it is superior, no, it's not. It's pathetic. It's very, very, very narrow in the functions it can perform. That it's inevitable, no. Look at the subsidies that are being given and the rulemaking that is happening to push artificial intelligence and dumb our children down. We talked a lot about mothering, but mothering is also an open learning environment for children. Education is cultivating the best in the child. So I've had to work on technological myths since the Green Revolution, since genetic engineering, and now with artificial intelligence. And they're talking about farming without farmers and food without food. So the question that was asked earlier of Sherry, I cannot understand how people can actually suffer the illusion that you're protecting the planet when you're allowing Roundup Ready soya to spread, taking this, putting it in a lab, making artificial blood with a genetically engineered yeast, and selling this as an impossible burger to protect the planet. No, it's going to bombard your gut. It is going to devastate. It is devastating the planet. So I just believe artificial intelligence is the new rhetoric of capitalist patriarchy to once again deny us our intelligence and once again deny nature her multiple intelligences. And therefore, we must celebrate our intelligences and put these inevitabilities in their place, show that it is about choice, but most importantly, show that any tool that humans make are products of human beings. When patriarchs made them, they are tools of patriarchal power. Technologies and tools are being made the new God, which we must worship blindly. No, they must be used as means subject to democratic control and assessment of what do they do to nature, what do they do to society, what do they do to the gift economy.
Thank you, Vandana. It was very profound. Yeah, what do they do to the gift economy? Yes, big deep breath on that. Joan, I wonder if you can take us into our last question and pose it to the panelists. We might go a little over, but I think it's important for us to have a little bit of discussion with the panelists responding to one question. Then we'll close with a prayer and then say our goodbyes. But let's have one more question for all the panelists.
Well, Eleanor Levine asked if each speaker could summarize her position. Another big question, but can you summarize your position for us all?
Jen, would you like to go first?
Well, I think what I believe is that if we can bring forward the gift economy in theory and in practice, making an example for everybody, and everybody had a mother. If they survived, somebody took care of them, whether it was their birth mother or somebody else. And I believe men are able to do mothering as well. If we can bring forward the gift paradigm I think we can have a shift in consciousness, and that shift in consciousness will allow alternative ways of doing things that we interpret in gift terms instead of in terms of exchange value and power over and capitalist successes. And we'll have to have some kind of a internal revolution of everybody to, as well as an external one, to be able to do that. But I think there's a lot of hope in it, because this system is obviously a failure in which we're living. And this other system has of gifting has maintained life in the human life for all of these many centuries, and the Mother Earth maintains life too. So it's really, our capitalism is a matricidal culture and economy. So we have to change that.
Thanks, Jen. Darcia?
All right, this is hard to do, but let's see what I can manage. So I think our way of living in the last, well, over millennia has deteriorated from the way we raise children and our stories. So top down, bottom up. So bottom up, we have impaired our senses, our neurobiology in all sorts of ways, but we're kind of a weed species. So we've adapted to just live, but it's not really fully human. And from the top down, then we have these stories that we're told about, oh no, this is normal, this is the best thing, this is progress, right? And so we're caught in this trap of under nurturing everyone. And that starts with babyhood, and particularly has an impact there because you don't know what you're missing. You don't know that you don't have receptive intelligence, that you don't have the full sense of your intuition, and you don't develop your heart sense, your heart mind, right? So all these things. And so we're in a soup of the boiled frogs where the water has been heating for a while and we're all cooked in a way, but we still have, those deep spiritual nudges that this isn't right. There's something terribly wrong. And so that's where we we need to join together with other people who have those intuitions about changing and restoring the cycle of cooperative companionship that Mother Earth provides, that mothering is the first step towards creating the societies that keep that kind of cycle going. I guess I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Darcia. Mary?
Yes, thank you. For me, one of the biggest challenges in working with Women's Spirit over the last several years, because we're very new in terms of the Ireland was colonized and invaded in so many ways, and our revolution that happened in 1916 was ambivalent, to say the least, in relation to women in particular. We exchanged one oppressor for another, and it's only now that we're beginning to be decolonizing. And one of the challenges of decolonizing is the question of language. And for the past 25 years, I've been organizing and resourcing and participating in festivals of Bridget. And from the very beginning, some of the language that was used in traditional religion just didn't fit with us. And so the challenge for me, like a word like the sacred, as I did anthropology in my younger days, and the sacred always, entailed the profane. So we don't use the language of sacred or profane. We use sometimes the word holy, which doesn't necessarily carry that connotation. We don't use the word goddess. We use the word Kaliak, because the Kaliak is the mysterious one, the woman with the cloak. And incidentally, she also had a husband who was called the Padak, who is the penis. And Sherry mentioned the corn mother. The Kaliak and the Padak, at the end of the harvest, sheaves were taken representing both of them, and they were put away until the springtime, and then they were planted with the harvest, recognizing a dialectical relationship between the Kalyak and the Badach. So we had very similar ceremonies, but maybe we need to find new ways of interpreting them. We don't use words like altar. We use words like the hearthstone, because that's where the ancestors lived, and that's how our continuity with all of life might be expressed. We don't use word like priest. From the very beginning, when we started our festivals of Bridget, the word priest, come on, it was just a bit too much. And we use the word weaver. And so we have weavers who weave the ceremonies together. And it's only in more recent years that I understood the significance of weaving in the old European panoply. And we don't use the word sacrifice. We use the word mercy. And I'm, as all of us are in this work, only beginning to understand the deeper meaning of some of those words and how they might be changed. And I'm still struggling with the word sacrifice and what might replace it. I think, when we say that women sacrifice, it's always given me the creeps. I have a bodily reaction to the word. And the word gift is, if we said that the soldiers, were gifting their lives, or that the hospital workers, the medical workers were gifting their time to save the COVID patients, we are prisoners of our language, and we really need to look at the language that we're using. And even at the very basic level, to change those words for ourselves, I think, would be a small part of a revolutionary act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Heidi?
How to put it short? In the studies I'm doing, I'm researching matriarchal societies, which gives us a completely different model how a human way of life than we are used to, because we are living in patriarchal societies, most of us. And I think if we don't have a completely different model how humans can organize their life, then it's difficult or more difficult to leave patriarchies because we do not know where to go. So my research on matriarchal society brings up a completely different paradigm of human society, which can help us to look deeper through all these patriarchal indoctrinations and institutions and maneuvers we are surrounded by. So matriarchal studies is always combined with a deep criticism of patriarchy. This belongs together. This is the first step, and I could learn from matriarchal societies only when I try to understand indigenous societies better and better, as far as is possible for me as a European woman. But I learned a lot from them, and I learned a lot from my friends of indigenous societies to develop this completely different paradigm of human society. This was the first step I did. And the second step is to use it now to look closer at history of cultures. For what we know or what we hear about history of cultures, this is all, most of it is patriarchal lies. And a patriarchal ideology, which is everywhere there about human history. So to look closer in human history and to show where we have very long epochs of development of mother-centered societies, of matriarchal societies, changes our picture of history completely. So I think, to put it very short, we can see that patriarchy is relatively short in human history and from the very beginning very dangerous. So this research, it's my hope, or it's what I try to do, it changes our perspective on society and history completely. It can change our mindset about these things completely. And this is my hope, that it can give us more and more practical ideas how to overcome all these patriarchal indoctrinations, ideas, philosophies, and all what we have around us. It has a practical impact, this research. For I'm often asked, how can a modern matriarchal society look like? And this is a very important question which comes out of this research and must be answered too. And this can only be a revolutionary answer to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Sherry, this is to sum up your position.
Okay. Thank you to everyone who has already spoken. I just am so always so moved by the beauty that is held by these women as they work through these processes of stripping away all of the layers that have been imposed upon that sacred feminine within us as it rises up beyond that. And Heidi, you know, is somebody who I really love, and I haven't had an opportunity to see. And so my heart is really nourished by being with you all and being able to see your faces. You know, I think about this in relation to motherland. I think about the fact that we are in the soil and the soil is in us, that I have a blood connection with the land and the land has a blood connection with me, that there is memory infused within that blood connection. And so when I think about it in terms of my cultural traditions and ways of being, there's so much evidence within our way of life that demonstrates to us these connections and the way that we're supposed to be moving in the world in order to be in alignment with that voice of creation that's actually guiding us toward the sustainability of life. And so even in our dances, like our dances are designed to mimic the animals and the natural world around us, and they're seasonal and they help us move with the rhythms of the seasons. And Gut Bardabo, who's a young Mi'kmaq man in his 20s, has been doing some research, and he discovered that when we're dancing the way that we're dancing and specific movements of our feet, that actually triggers these pressure points in our feet that release certain amino acids that are needed for our well-being. And that those things also are seasonally important, that with our dances, the certain dances that we do actually are corresponding to what our bodies need in relation to heat, what our bodies need in relation to cold, you know, what our bodies need as we prepare to store up for the long cold winter in the fall. And so as our bodies are shedding those elements from the winter as we move into the spring, and so that there's actually all of this science that's embedded into our way of being that has largely been ignored and misunderstood throughout history. And so when I think about that wisdom and about that alignment, that's what comes to me. Also understanding that our oral traditions were not created because we lack the ability to write. Our oral traditions were actually created and maintained because we understood that vibration and frequency create form. And that when we speak something, it actually triggers the mirror neurons within our bodies, which help us to have this experiential understanding of what it is we're hearing and witnessing. And that as we move back toward that core of mothering, back toward that umbilical connection with life, that we have to break away from the vibration and frequency of technology. We have to break away from the vibrational frequency of the language of capitalism and the language of the patriarchy. And we have to get our bare feet back on the ground, moving in alignment with nature, because that's how we're going to learn the mother tongue that's going to give us the vibration and the frequency that we need to be able to create a world that sustains life. And so I am, that's my position. That's where I operate from. The universe that I exist within is framed within that foundational understanding. And so that's my summary. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry. That's beautiful. Vandana, can you summarize your position?
You know, because I'm trained in quantum theory, I don't believe in positions because there's nothing like a position. We are both particles and waves spread across the universe. So I'd rather think in terms of potential and in terms of relationships, and particularly the relationships that are born through mothering, through giving, through caring. And these are relationships both with our Mother Earth, whom we have to mother now, you know. I think that is our calling. We have to mother Mother Earth. And then that is where the potential of humanity rising. Just the other day, I addressed 1,000 young people wanting to really practically engage in economies of giving. So it is happening all over, as Jen said. And let me just share two of my favorite poems. One is from the Rig Veda, our own ancient text. It's talking about healing plants. And this is partly, you know, the way Sherry was talking about the land and the soil. Mothers, you who have 100 forms and 1,000 growths, you have 100 ways of working. Please make this person whole for me. Be joyful, dear plants. Now, this is for healing, not violence as invasion. And my ultimate dream of the highest potential of the gift is a poem that has inspired me since I started to save seeds. Burn our land, burn our dreams, pour acid onto our songs, cover with sawdust the burst of blood of our massacred people. Denude the forests and the earth till no insect, no bird, no word can find a place to hide. Do that and more. I do not fear your tyranny. I do not despair ever, for I guard one seed, a little live seed that I shall safeguard and plant again. And I think if we continue to protect the seeds of the gift, there is no way it can be suppressed. Thank you.
Beautiful, Vandana. Thank you so much for that. I just want to remind you, I need to make a correction on our website. It's the Maternal Gift Economy Movement.org. Maternal Gift Economy Movement.org. And you'll be able to find resources and connections to each of the speakers. And I want to thank them. I want to thank each of you speakers for attending and bringing your wisdom to us today. I want to thank Diana and Elena Skoko for the technology support that you've had, and the three women who spoke the questions, Liliana, Joan, and Judith. These are true gifts that we've given and will continue to give because these sessions are recorded, and the links will go out to all who have registered so that they can be viewed later. And I know I'll be viewing over and over again. And with that, we'll be just closing now with Sherry, who's going to just give us a little blessing before we go. And we want to invite you to come to our next salon on December the 5th. So Sherry.
Thank you, Letitia.
Thank you so much to Letitia, to all of the women who have participated, to all of those who have been a part of this with us. And I just want to say, Kachiwali Wan Nita Besks, to the sisters that I have made on this journey. Thank you from my heart for your wisdom and for this process of lifting one another up that we're all a part of. And Willis Weldon, Sultina, Jusida Bamosawagan, Gulen Gaya Zania. So let us be thankful for all life, and let us take good care of ourselves as we move forward. And we don't have a word for goodbye in our language, so I'll say Upchichgnamio, Damida, until I see you again down the road, may you be blessed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And everyone, please take very good care of yourself in this time of this very difficult pandemic, and take care of each other. And really, it's so exciting to have all of you here. And I look forward to gathering with you again in a salon virtually and in person when we can. So goodbye. And if the panelists would like to unmute and just verbally say goodbye to everyone, that would be lovely.
Thank you, Letitia. Thank you for
Thank
everything.
you.
Wonderful.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.